Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. It is an early Monday morning. What is today? The 16th of December. We're getting close to Christmas. Look, you could be anywhere, but you are here. And I would hope that you're here because you enjoy this particular show. You enjoy this content. I give you news, politics, domestic and international, the best damn morning show that you can find pretty much anywhere on domestic and international news and politics. And so I'm glad that you're here. We've had a pretty interesting weekend, to put it mildly. Not necessarily an explosive weekend as it was when Syria fell, but at the very least, things have still been bubbling around the globe. I got to be honest, I've been listening to a bunch of different opinions on that subject, and I don't entirely exactly know what's true, to be fair. I'm going to have Lath on tomorrow. He's going to give a very different take on this, and I'm going to have Mark after that, who's probably going to give another interesting take on all of this. We are living in interesting times, to put it mildly. Israel, at this point, has decided to create their greater Israel. George Galloway has gotten to the point of saying that he is no longer dealing with that specific issue. Yes, he's going to stick up for the Gazans, but for all intents and purposes, it sounds like George Galloway is going with the notion that Israel has won, that the other countries in that region have effectively been destroyed, whether you talk about Iraq and the Iraq War and the devastation of Iraq, Afghanistan and the devastation of the Afghanistan War. If you want to talk about Syria, the devastation of Syria, the Gulf states that are effectively vassals of the U.S. I know Saudi Arabia is getting a little bit more spry, but all intents and purposes, those states stood by as the destruction of those other countries took place. So Galloway is not necessarily in the best mood on this issue. And I got to be honest, listen to Lath. Lath is a real good friend of the show, Lath Maroof. Um, I watched an interview he did yesterday, and his sadness is palpable. Um, it comes off of in waves at this notion that this state has effectively been destroyed, and that there's no hedge in the Middle East against Israeli expansion as they occupy and continue to pound Syria. And when I say pound Syria, I mean pound Syria. The last attack that they did created, I think it was a 3 point something of magnitude on a Richter scale. I also want you to notice something else. This is a poor time for a science lesson. But the difference in the quantity between the speed of light versus the speed of sound. Right off the bat, you see it. And then it takes a while for you to hear it. الله يلعنك يا إسرائيل. لا إله إلا الله. That is astonishing. That is astonishing. They are still pounding the hell out of Damascus today. And what's wild about it, the terrorists that took over the country are now begging the international community to get involved in order to hedge Israeli expansion. I mean, they've effectively occupied the Golan Heights. They've expanded further into the Golan Heights. And at this point, they're saying they're going to increase territories, meaning they're going to double the population in that area because at this point, they've effectively taken it. And, for all the people, the U.S. government may say, well, they're just doing that temporarily. Okay, but they've been in the Golan Heights temporarily for the past, 30, 40 years, give or take. Um, they're there to stay. Who's going to make them leave? They're there to stay. And whatever deals or association they have with the terrorist organization HTS, well, HTS has clearly made a decision not to attack Israel at all. And you could barely get Al Jani to say anything about the fact that Israel is attacking them at all, meaning can't spare a word of condemnation in the least as they continuously attack Syria. At this point, they've had over 400 different targeted strikes in Syria, Damascus, and everywhere else around the country, destroying any notion of weapons capacity that they might have had at their disposal. And so I suspect, and I could be wrong on this, Syria asked for help against Israeli aggression. But this request didn't take place until some of the interviews that were being had, where they would push the representative for the new Syrian government, and the Syrian and that leader wouldn't be able to say anything to condemn Israel. It's very bizarre. Now, one thought is, well, they don't necessarily have the military strength, and so they don't necessarily want to get into this kind of pissing match in a situation where they know Israel has been killing Arabs left and right. The other thought is that there was an understanding. There was understanding. And I tend to fall on that side of it, believing there was an understanding of things. I could be wrong, but I guess we will see as this evolve into the future. In the other sense, if you remember Zorbasvili, this woman, this is the Georgian president that didn't want to leave. French-born, widely considered to be a spy for France, and at the very least a stalking horse for the European Union. So there's an opposition party in parliament, the Georgian Dream Party, that won for the prime ministership. Zorbasvili has been whipping up discontent in Georgia, trying to get help of European leaders to put pressure on the Georgian government, trying to create a Maidan 2.0 scenario. This has been going on for at least a month. I've been following the story for a while now. And more pressure has been applied to the Georgian government to try to tilt that government over. And again, it starts to look a hell of a lot like Ukraine, Maidan 2.0. It got so bad that the prime minister came out and says, look, this will not be another Maidan 2.0. And just think of this kind of gravity that Ukraine and the overthrow of the Ukrainian government created, where it became a verb. It became a verb. So Zorbasvili, lost in the Georgian presidential elections. Now, for the longest time, she kept saying, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not going anywhere. And of course, she kept saying that because I suspect she figured she was going to lose the upcoming elections. And whatever she figured, she ended up being absolutely and entirely correct. Mikhail Kavishvili ends up winning the election. Now, CNN gives the worst take on this that I think I've ever read anywhere. And considering the other story that CNN has done with the fake journalists, or I'm sorry, the fake jailbreak, it doesn't necessarily shock me that CNN will come out with a take like this. So this is the way that CNN is reporting this story. This is outrageous. And God, I wish they could sue the hell out of CNN for this, but they can't. So CNN, your website sucks. Your website sucks. All right. Because it's not allowing me to see the top part of it. Okay, Mikhail Kachashvili, former MP for the ruling Georgia Dream Party and played for the English soccer team Manchester City during the 1950s. He was the only candidate in the running. For the first time, the president was chosen not by a national election, but in parliament by direct ballot of 300 members, electoral college made up of MPs and representatives of the local government. Now, I'm trying to get to the very top of this because the way CNN writes it is that the Russian-backed candidate wins. Now, this is outrageous. And I can't show that because of the way CNN's website is, but describing that guy or any of these people as quote-unquote Russian-backed is outrageous. And maybe Russian-backed wasn't the way to use it, but basically the Russian-friendly or something to that effect. They added Russia into it, when the reality of it is these people are just nationalists. If you are a nationalist and you're looking out for the best interests of your country and your government, you may come away with a different take. than what the European Union wants, especially if they want your country embroiled into a war. It is not shocking, it is not weird, it's not strange. Somewhere along the way, the European Union has made the decision that democracy, meaning falling in line with Europe, even if it's against the best interests of the local populations. And if you want to see how that turns out, look at Germany. Germany is a humiliation right now. One of the articles, The Beating Heart of Europe, fails at the moment when Europe needs it the most. Why has it failed, Bloomberg? It has failed because they've made the decision to cut themselves off of Russian oil. It's very straightforward. And to make this even worse, they're also going through this green energy period at the exact same time where they're cutting themselves off of Russian oil. So a supply or a product that allowed Europe to be Europe, this garden, and the way that they call it, gets cut off. And now Europe is having difficulty being the garden because they're paying 5 times more than what they were paying prior for oil or for gas. And by the way, still buying Russian gas. They're just buying it through a third party, which is paid for with a markup, whether you get it from India or Saudi Arabia. Both of those countries have been buying Russian oil hand over fist and selling it to whoever would buy it at a markup, making a nice profit for themselves. So there's that. As Jen Psaki said, values is not without cost. Fair enough. Values is not without cost. Fair enough. If that's what you want to call values. Getting the country utterly and entirely destroyed. And for that matter, screwing with democracy. Romania, for example, they killed the election because they didn't like the candidate that was most likely going to win that election. And in this case, they're putting all sorts of pressure on the government in order to overthrow that government in Georgia. Both of those cases are outrageous. I would add South Korea. I would add that into it also, but I'll leave that out for the time being. The other story I wanted to hit before we go into my first guess. Drones. Drones. The drone story has piqued my interest. The drone story has piqued my interest. Part of the reason it has piqued my interest is because there's a discrepancy between what is being said by the feds versus what is being said by people who are on the ground who either have been seeing the drones or, for that matter, have been reporting on the drones. Meaning, when you get the Coast Guard going out to check sightings, and the Coast Guard comes back and says there are 20 drones, 15 to 30 behind us, chasing us, harassing us. Okay, well, that's different. That's not an airplane. And they're being very specific about what they're saying. Also, what it seems to be is there are multiple types of drones. There are some that are, they call them 6 feet. There are some that are just airplanes that people are mistaking for drones. And there are others that are the ones that are more interesting, which seem to be circular and which seems to hover on a particular spot or in a particular place for long periods of time. Now, there's been a slew of these that have been seen all over New Jersey. And I gotta be honest, I don't know what they are. So this was Kirby talking about the drones. And I want to point out something else that is a huge discrepancy in what Kirby is saying, or for that matter, what Mayorkas is saying. So this is Kirby discussing the drones. And I want you to listen to what Kirby says here, because what Kirby says here is not really accurate. Let's see if I can turn this up. There we are.
We have no evidence at this time that the reported drone sightings pose a national security or a public safety threat or have a foreign nexus.
Okay, I'm going to stop right here because my guest is here and I want to get to my guest. And I have another guest to have a conversation about this later on today. Dave Beatty, he's an investigative reporter. He is also an advocate drone flyer. And so he will be a great person to talk to on this. But we can get to that later. I am joined with Arnaud Devillet. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
Hello, Jamal. Thank you for having me. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
No, man, thank you for joining me. Arnaud Devillet, and I want to make sure I'm getting your last name correctly. Is Devillet correct? Excellent.
Perfect.
Arnaud Devillet, he's an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law and participated in the defense of President Saddam Hussein, along with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is the author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of American Political Consensus. Arno, you are the person to talk to today, man. I'm glad you could join me. Thank you for this, especially such early time in the morning. Um, I want to start first with Russia, and I want to pivot a little bit to the interplay between Russia and Syria. So let's start with Russia first. So one of the reportings that is, oh, wait a minute, let me fix this before we get started. There we are. One of the reportings, or one of some of the reporting that has come out, has pointed to desertions in Ukrainian armed forces, saying that these were heavy. I mean, apparently there are like 95,000 cases going back to 2022, but these have skyrocketed over the last several months in regards to the war. Can you talk about this for a bit and give us a heads up on where things stand in conflict?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yes. Okay. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the Ukraine theater in conjunction with the Syrian situation. For we see what happens when, on one hand, you have a regular militaries, i.e., the one that used to exist in Syria, which was hollowed out by, let's say, at least 15 years, 14, 15 years of sanctions, non-access to their resources, their own resources, being decoupled from the dollar system, and therefore being unable to sustain morale over time, being essentially hollowed out with the whole Western alliance basically pitching in trying to eradicate, obliterate the capacity of that country to mount a fight over the long term. And when you look at the situation in Ukraine, where by all accounts the conflict is heavily tilting in favor of Russia, nonetheless, because and owing to the heavy support of said Western alliance, with billions upon billions of dollars. I mean, we are estimating now that since the start of the special military operation, Ukraine has received no less than $120 billion. The US providing for half of this amount, that we have conscription laws being passed repeatedly with for the current wave of forced conscription, the plan being to throw into the meat grinder no less than 200,000 conscript. This on the back of a law calling for the age of conscription to be lowered to 18 years old. And despite this military disaster and the very high rate of attrition on the Ukrainian side, we're still dealing with the situation as of right now, as I speak to you, with the two armies essentially exchanging positions around key settlements alongside the front line. Within a couple of days, you'll have the Russian army, armed forces taking control of a reservoir or some heights around, a key location on the front. And within a couple of days, the Ukrainians will take it back. So we're really dealing with a situation where, with the Trump administration coming in January 20th, on the background of Trump and Zelensky meeting in Paris a few days ago, with the result that basically Zelensky is turning down Trump's injunction calling for a ceasefire. Uh, Everything is looking as if Zelensky is trying to make it as difficult as possible for Trump to be negotiating in a situation where a positive outcome can come out. And we know that a few weeks back, authorizations were given to Kiev to use those long-range missiles deep into Russian territory. This is also part of the course as we speak now, with constant attacks on what Russia calls its old territories. We'll call it Russia proper, whether it's in Bryansk or Belgorod, with also attacks on Crimea, Sebastopol, going back to last June, and also the wide use of drones, dozens of drones being sent basically on civilian areas, no military use whatsoever, but to inflict terror essentially. With the epics of this use of drone happening a few days back when the Chechen Republic was actually targeted, by a couple of drones, which is, somewhat removed from the front lines. So the Ukrainian side is really throwing everything they've got, the whole kitchen sink, trying at all cost to limit Russia's gains and Russia's position in future negotiation. And this is owing to the full-blown support. We know that the 24 billions that were floated, $24 billion floated by the departing Biden administrations, essentially did not succeed. But we still get substantial chunks of money still being somehow allocated to the Ukrainian theater. We know now, and that the EU itself has stepped in and has dug into the Russian 300 billion slush fund, allocating 20 billion to the war effort. And we have declaration statements made by the NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte, who calls on a increase in NATO budget allocation from European countries from 2 to at least 3%, with the idea that they have to completely re-engineer their war budgets. So this is a situation where, as of this moment now, there's no talks of negotiations, no talks of ceasefire. The battles are raging all throughout the fronts, keeping in mind that there's a key point which has been discussed in other podcasts, I assume, which is the city of Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is a hub. If the Russian armed forces were to succeed in taking Pokrovsk, essentially there would not be any defensive lines behind this. It would be all the way to Dnipropetrovsk, basically. So this explains in a large part why the Ukrainian armed forces are basically fighting like, not like their life depends on it. It does, but with everything on the line essentially, because they are being propped up by those who do not want any kind of negotiation to take place, or to the extent there are negotiations, they want to make sure that Russia is somehow limited in its negotiating levers. So this is where we are right now.
If Russia believes that Donald Trump is going to make, and let me ask this in a slightly different way. I got to be honest, I don't know what Trump would do when he gets in office. But it seems that the Biden administration believes that Donald Trump is going to do something different, at the very least try to bring this to a close. Otherwise, I don't know why Joe Biden is throwing everything at the wall in the way that he's doing, that he's risking these red lines. Donald Trump has come out and effectively attacked Joe Biden for doing so, slamming him, saying, basically, you're hijacking my foreign policy. You lost the race. You don't get to escalate in this way just before I get into office in order to screw up my ability to make a deal. From your point of view, I guess I don't see the point of what Zelensky is doing with this. And the reason I say this, up to this point, they've been completely incapable of stopping the Russian advance. And Petrovsk will fall, just like every other city that the Russians have put their attention to fell. And it seems that the Russian advance is getting faster, not slower. And it seems that Ukraine is getting weaker, not necessarily stronger. From your point of view, in regards to the negotiations, where do you think these are going to fall? Let me ask you about Trump. Let me ask it that way. Do you believe that Donald Trump will come up with some level of negotiations? Like I said, at the very least, it seems that Joe Biden believes it. But do you trust Trump? And maybe trust is the wrong word for it. But do you believe this notion that he's going to try to bring it to a close? What are your thoughts on this before I go into other questions on this way?
Well, if we go by what Trump has been releasing as far as his statements, as far as his intent to put an end to the violence,
Mm-hmm.
we can only go with this idea that there's a call for a ceasefire, but a ceasefire at what cost?
Right.
I mean, we've seen the last few days in Syria that any kind of approach bearing on freezing conflicts is basically a recipe to have said conflict explode a few years back with the consequences that you could strategically find yourself on your back heel.
Mm-hmm.
So Russia is pretty much aware of this, if anything, having learned from the situation in Syria. So this idea that sure, the territories will be internationally recognized, but if the idea is to freeze the conflict, throwing in European nation peacekeepers, essentially, alongside a somewhat of a DMZ situation as we have in Korean Peninsula, with some vague promises that Ukraine or what's left of it would not join NATO for any given amount of time, we might just basically be in a situation where 5 years down the road, 3 years down the road, who knows? I mean, Trump has only 2 years objectively where he can somehow make a difference. We don't know what might happen during the midterm elections in 2026. And obviously by 2028, he'll be gone. So who knows who might replace him and with what intent. So the Russians are really now angling to make sure that uh, what they put forward during the Istanbul peace negotiation in 2022 is the roadmap. And this calls for essentially a reinvention of the European architecture,
Mm-hmm.
with basically Ukraine becoming a demilitarized, denazified, of course, and forever a neutral, somewhat of a gray zone in the continent, but not subjected to any kind of bloc logic. Will that be acceptable? Will that be palatable to the Western countries? This remains to be seen. I mean, there are very powerful forces, behind Donald Trump, who are going to go out of their way and try to do everything they can to prevent some kind of an understanding from taking place. We are also not inured to the notion that we may be witnessing a black swan event between now and Trump's inauguration. It's perfectly possible that the Ukrainians, would try to somehow tweak the configuration using some dirty bomb, which might completely change the dynamics and lead the Russians to overreact. Let's not forget that the idea of issuing the permissions to use those ATACMS missiles is to goad the Russian Federation in doing something that would then justify all the rhetoric that we've heard on the Western side of things for literally years now, which is that Russia is a threat to them, that Russia is trying to reconstitute their empire, that Russia won't stop until they get to the Atlantic coast. So we have to understand how those people think. It's a very pervert and very cynical game. They're not trying to somehow be rational in a sense where they want to bring this thing to a close where everybody saves space and everybody's interests are taken into account.
Well, is that even possible, though? I mean, keep in mind, from the standpoint of the West, their objective was very clear. We want to put a strategic defeat on Russia. That was their goal. That was their objective. They wanted to do it economically and, for that matter, militarily. So, would the Russian response to that point, I mean, is there a way for both sides to save face on this? Or, no, one side has to lose in order to set a precedent? Or how do you view this?
Well, I think there are ways to have both sides save face. Um, Obviously, there are a lot of economic interests who have invested heavily into Ukraine.
Mhm.
Uh, we've known about them for a long time. The main investment funds,
Right.
they own Ukraine. They own Ukraine's political class. And I spoke about it in my book, have directly influenced the legislative agenda through their Ukrainian proxy, as far as accaparation of state-owned companies through the use of those boards, revised boards of governors, which are now, by and large, staffed with Western, individuals. So they're not going to let go of those investments. If you add to this, obviously, what will obviously take place, and we know about it now because he came out publicly, Kash Patel, basically said, notwithstanding the pardon on X, Y, and Z, bearing on what might have been going on the last 10 years in Ukraine, I'm going to be looking into this as soon as if I get confirmed, I'm going to be, looking into what happened there. And this goes straight to, the issue of maybe running an audit, trying to find out where did the money go, who benefited from it, how was the USAID used as an instrument to embezzle some of that money.
That's right.
You're basically touching very sensitive matters here. And this adds another layer as to why we're seeing this kind of desperate approach, in trying to double down on the situation rather than laying the ground for the incoming administration to come up with a deal.
You know, I'm curious on how far do you think the Biden administration is willing to go with this? Like, because it, they have seen, they don't seem to have an issue with crossing Putin's red lines. And apparently, Putin gave a speech recently where he pointed out they are pushing us to the brink, where they're forcing us to respond, they're forcing us to retaliate. Because you're right, it seems that the Biden administration's come up with this logic that, okay, if Putin believes that Trump is going to do something different, then he's going to be less inclined to react to our provocations. So we're allowed to provocate within a certain amount of space because we believe that Putin believes that Trump is going to do something different. There's this kind of weird logic that's effectively taking place in the way that they're engaging. I guess my thing is, how far do you think they're trying to push this? Do you think that they're going for a war in a traditional sense, but they want to create a provocation for Russia to do so, meaning we are going to push this to try to provoke the Russians to respond? Or do you think, no, well, no, they don't necessarily want a war, but they want to push it to the edge of a war? What is your, and the reason why I ask this is because the entire, if you go back to William Burns wrote the memo, Net Means Net, where he pointed out we are going to end up in a civil war that Russia doesn't want to be involved in, but they will have to be involved in. Meaning from early on, they fully understood that Ukraine was a red line. It didn't stop them from pushing at all. They just kept pushing, they kept pushing, they kept pushing, knowing full well that Russia was going to have to get involved based on their own analysis of events. From your take on this, do you think that they're actually trying to provoke a war, or do you think they're trying to get up to the edge where they want the Russians to do something that would provoke a NATO reaction? What are your thoughts? Like you said, an overreaction in this case by the Russians.
Well, I think that we're dealing with people who are almost emotionally involved. It's not just an issue of running federal policy, foreign policy. No, we're dealing with people who have obviously, objectively, a bone to pick with Russia. We're not going to get into the ins and outs as to exactly what motivates those people. It would basically take us out of the purview of our discussion. But suffice it to say, it goes way, way back. For some of them, going back a century, and those are family issues. And the problem is we have those very people in charge of U.S. foreign policy, basically using the full might of the federal government to settle the score. And so we're not dealing with rational people. And to the extent they objectively are looking at a situation happening pretty soon where everything that they've involved themselves into, they've invested themselves into, is likely coming to a grinding halt. We are dealing with a cop out on their side, which basically gets us into a uncharted territory. I mean, those people are perfectly willing to create themselves an event and blame it on Russia in order to get public opinion to go along. Because public opinion is a major component of the discussion we're having now, as far as the West is concerned. Despite the narrative being controlled by the legacy media, a lot of people increasingly are getting their news from alternate sources, and all it takes is to basically educate people and repeat and repeat until people understand that there's a different tune going on here. It's not necessarily what they've been told, that they themselves are seeing their regular daily lifestyle being adversely impacted by all the money that's going to a place which has nothing to do with the American people. If we just talk about the American people, we could talk about the European people as well. So everybody is basically fed up with this, and they are seeing their political leaderships basically acting against their own interest in favor of some kind of opaque agenda. So it's important in that sense for the establishment, as it were, to somehow reassert itself. The only way to reassert itself for the establishment would be to somehow create an event which would completely baffle people and somehow uh, strike them into their core so that they would comply. Mike Pence talked about how NATO basically has weaponized itself against uh, the public in the West. Going back to 2015, the decision was made that in order for the Western establishment, the transnational Euro-Atlantic class, to maintain its hegemony or its objectives of basically bringing to heel the mainland, the world island, Eurasia, to prevent the rise of BRICS, they would need to adopt a war economy. And this would come at the expense of what everybody in the West has taken for granted, going back to the 1945, essentially. Healthcare systems, a robust middle class, this idea of benevolent economic policies. This has to go because on a war footing, on a war economy, there's obviously no budget left for those kind of agendas. And so, to the extent they anticipate people to revolt, uh, they need to take measures to prevent any kind of populist or alternate, out of control candidate from taking power. We've seen it in Romania recently, where the so-called pro-Russian is not pro-Russian; it's just anti-war. But they had the internal polls showing that the guy was about to win the election in a landslide, and they somehow weaponized the justice system there, invoking. I mean, they don't even try to conceal anything. They don't even try to somehow dress everything up in a way that's believable to public opinion. They invoked in a very vague fashion, and the constitutional court opinion said so, that they would justify it somehow down the road. But for the time being, it had something to do with said candidate use of TikTok.
Yeah, they said TikTok.
It's
Just
crazy.
outrageous. Yeah. They did
But
the same
this is
thing here, by the way, with Trump, where they said social media that the Russians, how did they said? They said that the Russians had Twitter feeds, Twitter videos, or Twitter
Twitter
ads.
bots. Yeah.
That they spent $50,000 on Twitter bots. Hillary Clinton, keep in mind, by the way, Clinton had a $5 million Twitter army by itself. She spent $1.2 billion on the campaign. And they said Facebook and Twitter ads, half of which took place after the election, toppled Hillary Clinton's election. And that's what they used to say the Russians were involved. And when I heard the thing of Romania, I was like, okay, this is outrageous. You guys are effectively destroying an election on TikTok ads or something to that effect that the Russians were supposed to be involved in. It is outrageous that they're willing to do that. By the way, and I want to get into that. I'm glad you mentioned that. Do you think that there's a link between South Korea and the way that they tried to overthrow the South Korean government, Romania, which I full well consider to be a coup, Georgia, where they're trying to overthrow the Georgian government, and yeah, I would even add in Syria. I mean, Donald Trump has, in all of these places, you get either European or US involvement in all of these places. I mean, the one in Korea is basically a puppet of the United States. Georgia is going through the same tactics that they were using for Ukraine, just this overwhelming political push, a large share of which are coming from outside of the country. From your point of view, are all of these things interrelated to each other and related on some way to Trump coming in office?
Well, yes and no. I mean, Trump is trying to basically, it's almost like what happened with Obama back in '09 after 8 years
Mhm,
of the Bush neocon administration. Obama
mhm,
was supposed to be this somewhat messianic figure who was going to, as Colin Powell called it, a transformative figure. But it was just basically a product being unpacked and presented to the public.
mhm,
You know, we should never underestimate the establishment propensity and skills in reinventing, retooling what is, by all accounts, the same old policies. And Obama was an example of that. We know that nothing essentially changed under him, even though he was presented with a Nobel Peace Prize as early as '09,
right,
before he
right,
even had 1 year under his belt. But it was a way to present him. His first trip was to Egypt. We all remember this inaugural foreign policy, foreign trip to Egypt,
mhm,
and he made that big speech there. And the guy was eloquent, which was a big departure from the bumbling Bush Jr. And basically, the system, the establishment bought themselves a new lease on life for a few years. Then we had the Arab Spring,
mhm,
and the idea was that, it was time to get rid of all those authoritarian regime and replace them with, popular will. But we all know that this was completely artificially induced. And so now we're in a situation where essentially Trump is being brought back in. Obviously, he secured somehow assurances from the establishment that they would not oppose his candidacy to begin with, and would not necessarily step into what he intends to do, at least domestically. But on the foreign policy front, I don't think we're going to see any difference. If anything, in the light of BRICS and in the light of the de-dollarization process going on now, which is a core issue of national security as far as the US establishment is concerned, they will essentially proceed on doing what they've done to the so-called axis of resistance in West Asia. They will
mhm,
isolate every component. They will deal with them separately. Either they will coup them, or they will hollow them out, or they will cut them off from any kind of assistance, and they will deal with them in isolation using proxies, to be sure. But this is the goal. So whether it's West Asia or whether it's South Korea, whether it's Romania, just to remind our listeners, is slated to basically host the largest NATO base, even bigger than the one in Germany, right on the flank with Russia, on the eastern flank of NATO.
mhm.
So if that sounds like you know a sign that they want to kind of calm things down and retool their attitude towards Russia, uh, just it doesn't look too good. And to the
Now,
extent we
just to
have
be
a
clear,
candidate.
No,
Yes,
no,
in that
please
country,
finish.
which was about to win the election,
Mhm.
and who ran basically on a peace platform, he had to go. So this is what they do now. They're not making any apologies. In other words,
Yeah,
in Georgia, we actually have Ukrainian elements on the ground. We have members of European embassies staff, on the ground as well, coordinating the crowds to attack the parliament, to provoke the police, to try to get the police to overreact in such a way as to paint the Dream Party led government as an authoritarian government which represses democracy. It's the same old playbook, whichever way you look at it. And it's going to be interesting to see because today is the 16th. The incumbent president, she should be stepping down. There was an election a couple of days ago, so
supposed to
let's
be.
see where that yeah let's see where that actually leads us. But they are not going to give up on Georgia. Georgia is an important way for them to start a second front. They want to try to get as many grenade or obstacles into Trump's ability to somehow bring the whole thing down in that region.
Well, that's kind of my point. Like, I would argue that Donald Trump is slightly different. Like, so the first time around, and it's not so much what Trump will do. I'm going by this notion of what they think Trump will do, what they think he will do. Maybe a little bit different than what he actually does. I mean, in the first administration, he was willing to make a deal with North Korea to get them to stop firing missiles into the Sea of Japan. He was attacked remorselessly for doing so. He stopped Obama's regime change war, even though he didn't exactly stop it. But at the very least, he stopped the CIA portion of them trying to overthrow the government directly. Um, and even this time around, Donald Trump had pointed out, well, yeah, I'll pull our troops out of Syria. He would most likely go to making a deal with North Korea. I mean, they seem to think that he is going to change orthodoxy in regards to the way we do our foreign policy. And I understand, I'm skeptical of that too, totally. So don't misunderstand me. But they seem to think it in the way that they are responding. I mean, they're essentially taking the mask off, whether it's in the places in Europe, or for that matter, North Korea, or for that matter, Syria. And at the very least, the Syrian and the North Korea angle are things that Donald Trump was directly related to in the previous administration, that they complained, that they moaned about, and they entirely attacked him for, relentlessly for it. I guess my thing is, Donald Trump will be perfectly okay with a nationalist government coming into power that is against the Ukrainian war, whether that's in Georgia or, for that matter, whether that's in Romania. And he's even complained about what they were doing, I believe, in Romania, if nothing else. Because, again, from his point of view, okay, you're trying to go after the nationalists. He considers himself a nationalist, in which case he finds a political kinship to that nationalist group that may be against the war. I guess that's where I'm coming from this angle at. It's not so much what I think Donald Trump would do. I don't know what Trump would do. It's what I'm thinking that they think, what they think he will do. And it seems that what they think he would do is going to be somewhat is upsetting the apple cart. Give me your thoughts on that. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, as you said, Trump is a nationalist, and as a nationalist, he's firstly concerned about U.S. interest. To
Mhm.
the extent when he left office, the situation was not as bad as it is now as far as the economic situation of the US. Now, the US is straddled with trillions of dollars in deficits, with a significant percentage of the US debt being dumped by key actors worldwide. Is he going to basically let it happen, or is he going to have to resort to coercive measures? I think it would be a mistake to imagine Trump somehow accepting the decline of the American empire in that sense.
Mhm.
He will do whatever he needs to do because he's a nationalist again. So the dollar is again a key component of this hegemonic architecture, and he's not going to stand by and let it happen. Now you mentioned what he said about at the time when he tried to pull the troops from Syria. He never did pull the troops from Syria. If anything, U.S. presence was ramped up. In
Stable.
2016, 2017, no less than 18 to 20 U.S. bases were built alongside the border between
That's right.
Syria and Iraq. It was under his watch that they basically pillaged Syrian oil using even a U.S. company which had obtained a waiver from the State Department at the time, where Pompeo himself announced it in August 2020. They were basically making a buck on it and
Yeah.
sending the oil back to into Turkey. And don't forget that he's also under it was under his administration that the U.S. pulled out unilaterally from the JCPOA.
Hmm.
The idea was somehow to apply maximum pressure on Iran, trying to force him to extend and widen the scope of the negotiation to include ballistic capabilities and their support to what they perceived as Iran-backed militias in the region.
Hmm.
This was a non-starter for the Iranians, obviously, because that was completely outside the purpose, the purview of what had been negotiated. But we can expect this maximum pressure 2.0 to be implemented as soon as he gets into office. So we're not out of forever wars by any means. And with the new configuration in West Asia now, it becomes a lot more palatable for the U.S. proxy in the region to contemplate a bunker buster, massive, air camping against Iranian installations, to be sure. And Iran won't take it standing down. They already said they would retaliate to the full extent. They
Hmm.
would attack U.S. installation in Bahrain. They will make it impossible for the U.S. to remain, unscathed, for that matter, which is exactly what the Israeli wants because they want to drag the U.S. government into their expansionist ventures. And last but not least, in terms of the world economy, well, with the basically the obstruction, the taking out of the Straits of Hormuz, that would
Hmm.
basically get the oil barrel, probably up to $300 to $400, a pops. So it's game over right there. So you can say that he's, winding down operations in Ukraine, but if the idea is to ramp him up in West Asia, with all the consequences that this can lead to, you're back where you started.
No, on that I do agree with you. The Iran thing, that's why I left Iran out because on that one he's a lunatic, to put it mildly. And again, I don't even know what he's going to do in Ukraine per se, because I think you're right. It's very possible that Putin could say these are my terms, and Donald Trump doesn't want to accept the terms because he doesn't want to look, weak or doesn't want to look bad or something to that effect. Meaning, I have no idea how any of this stuff is going to pan out because he is a nationalist. He's a wild card, if nothing else.
Hmm.
I want to go to Syria for a bit. I there was a talk. I'm not going to bring the person's name into it, but in the conversation, they pointed out that Russia abandoned Syria. That basically Russia made a deal. And by the way, I don't agree with this. I don't buy the premise of this, but that Russia made a deal in order with the Trump administration, or let's say with America, let's say it that way, in order to abandon Syria in order to get a deal on Ukraine. Why do you think the Syrian thing fell apart so quickly from your point of view?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I don't believe there was any deals. I don't see how Russia would exchange its assets on the Syrian coast,
Agreed.
what with their ability to project their policy all the way into Africa. So, on the basis of this alone, that makes no sense. What happened in Syria? Well, a few things happened in Syria. Obviously, it all starts with the inability of the Syrian governments to take into account that basically, if there's a war to be waged, they're going to have to wage it themselves. They cannot
Right.
rely on their allies. And I think that was the first mistake, and probably the fatal one. Suggestions were made going back to 2018. The Russian Federation offered to completely retool the Syrian army, and they basically would accept in exchange the possibility for Russian companies to move in and get access to Syrian markets. This was refused. There was also the possibility to abide by the resolution 2254. The Russian suggested the adoption, or at least the consideration, of a draft constitution in 2017, which bore on somewhat of a federal model for Syria, which would take into account the diversity of its different populations and allow them to have somewhat, in some cases at least, autonomous status. This was refused, flat out refused. Uh, if we look at the military situation on the ground in the wake of the March 2020 ceasefire, a lot could have been done to at least contain, if not slow down, what happened on November 27th. Trenches could have been built. Um, the officers who valiantly illustrated themselves during the liberation campaign between 2014 and 2019 could have been promoted within the Syrian government. They were cast aside
Yeah.
owing to sectarian rivalries within the Syrian state. And I guess there was also a miscalculation as far as Assad's perception of the possibility for Syria to cajole the United States into easing on the sanctions using the intermediaries such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So the calculus was that with Syria reintegrating the Arab League, basically Assad banked on the notion that the Gulf monarchies would be able to somehow negotiate on his behalf and secure the authorization to start reinvesting into the country. Obviously, that was a miscalculation because when the time came and the people were completely, the morale was very low. The Syrian military was basically on its knees. It had not integrated the new art of war bearing on the use of drones, unlike the militants in Idlib who had received direct assistance from the SBU, the Ukrainian SBU, who had taught them how to integrate the drones. They manufactured a lot of them,
Hmm.
and we saw the difference because when operations started, basically uh, the use of drones and FVPs was like having an air force essentially for them.
Right.
So that allowed them to basically create havoc and panic and prevent any kind of organizing a defensive line for the Syrian armies. If you add into account the fact that Hezbollah was considerably weakened owing to their direct engagement, military engagement with Israel, it was almost mission impossible at this point. There might have been a possibility to allow time to deploy the 25th Division led by Suhail Hassan, one of the most qualified high officer of the Syrian Arab Army.
Mhm.
So qualified was he that the Russians even assigned to him Russian security guards because they basically wanted him to be, to be preserved. They had identified his skills. But as I said earlier, his successes during the liberation campaign also made him a target within the Syrian establishment. And so a lot of people like him were, unfortunately decommissioned or at least put on a freeze. That might have made a difference as far as building trenches around Idlib, putting dragon teeth everywhere, anti-tank mines personnel, manning all those installations. I mean, 5 years is a long time to create major fortification. We've seen it in
Hmm.
Ukraine. And so that would have prevented, the quick expansion of the militants, taking first Aleppo and then moving on forward until, the elite forces, the elite armored divisions would have been able to be redeployed. they would have been, they would have had the initiative. They would have retained the initiative on the ground. Unfortunately, none of those fortifications were built,
Oh.
and all the capable officers were decommissioned and replaced by regular conscripts, basically, to keep an eye on this situation, which was the subject of repeated intelligence reports. This was stated even by the foreign minister of
Mhm.
Iran a week ago, going back as far as October, if not earlier. So it is what it is. But it's But to come back to your question, was there a deal? No, that would make no sense whatsoever for Russia to sacrifice its bases. And what kind of a deal would that be? I mean, deals are made to be broken anyway, right?
Yeah. No, I
That would
agree
be
with
the
you. I
loss
didn't
of
think it
face,
made.
loss of prestige. I mean, to be sure, a lot of commentators have said that somehow this is going to be a difficult one for Russia to swallow. And a lot of countries that, have expressed their desire to become a partner of BRICS and eventually join BRICS, who are by all accounts allies of Russia, have, in some circles, but significant circles, expressed the fear that, if somehow they get dumped the way they perceive it, at least, the Syrian government was dumped, then what's the point to, confront the American frontally? You know?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
all this to say that the Russians are not stupid. They would have never allowed a situation like this to take place, knowing full well that the perception among their friends would be that, can we trust them?
Right.
That's not
No,
something they were willing to go along. So
no, I
no,
agree with
there
you.
was no deal. Impossible.
No, I totally agree with you. I didn't think they would make a
There
deal with the
was there
UN.
was a there was a taking into account of the situation, which led the Russian to basically cut their losses and try to make a lemonade out of lemons.
Mhm.
And we saw that there was a change in rhetoric and semantics following the summit of foreign ministers in Doha.
Doha.
Prior to the meeting, Lavrov was talking about terrorist groups. After the meeting, he was talking about armed opposition. So that was where it happened. They basically, again, they took stock of the situation and adjusted.
You cut bait. Arno, man, thank you for this. I appreciate this conversation. I legitimately do. I really
Thank
do.
you.
Arnaud Develay, he's an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law and participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein, along with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction action or regime posed against Syria while living in Damascus. He is the author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the American Political Consensus. I really enjoyed this conversation today, I swear. And I think the audience did too. We have a really good crowd today. So thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good one. All right. I want to bring in my next guest, the man of the hour. Everybody's been asking for him for the last several weeks. Dr. Wilmer Leon. He is political scientist, nationally
Oh
syndicated
my,
columnist.
that's funny.
They've been asking for you, man. They've been asking for you. Dr. Wilmer Leon, he's a political scientist, nationally syndicated columnist, and you have several shows that you host. Please tell the audience where they can find you.
Well, you can find me at Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon on YouTube at Monday through Friday from 10 to 11 on YouTube. That's Connecting the Dots. And then you can also find me every Saturday from 11 to 2 p.m. Eastern on Sirius XM channel 126. And the show is Inside the Issues. And you can always find me here.
Oh, you can always find him here, Inside the Issues. No, man, I'm glad to have you. I mean, there have been certain stories that have come up that have been utterly and entirely fascinating to me. And one of those, Stephanopoulos is ordered to pay Donald Trump $15 million. $15 million. And even worse than that, because he's a millionaire, so that money is not going to hurt him all that much. But the apology is probably going to kill him. The money don't kill him. The apology, Lord knows, is going to kill him. Now, the reason that Trump has to pay him money is because of this clip right here, where he effectively called Trump a rapist. As mind you, he did this in a segment where he's talking to Nancy Mace. Nancy Mace was a rape survivor, and he was bringing this up to Nancy Mace like, well, you are a rape survivor. How on earth can you support a rapist? That was the tenor of the conversation. Already it's a little dicey. He's effectively using a rape against her in a political context. This is the clip just so the audience can see it for themselves. It's outrageous. At least I think it's outrageous. You can disagree with me on this, but let's play the clip first.
I still get judged for it today.
I'm asking you a very simple question.
And I answered
Explain
it. You're
why-
shaming me for
I'm
my
not-
political choices.
I'm asking you a question about why you endorse someone who's been found liable for rape.
It was
answer the
not a
question.
criminal court. This was
It was a civil
It
court
was a
that found
civil
him
court.
liable
And
for
by the
rape.
way, she joked about the judgment and what she was going to do with all that money, and I find that offensive.
I'm asking you
but
about the
as
man
a
who's-
rape victim who's been shamed for years now because of her rape, you're trying to shame me again by asking me this
You've
political
repeated
question.
that. You've repeated that again.
I think
again,
it's
and again.
offensive. As a woman, I find it offensive.
I'm
For my
asking you-
political choices, I've endorsed the man that I believe is best for our country. It's not Joe Biden. And you look.
So that obviously didn't go well. That conversation obviously didn't go well. Nevertheless, he was, if I'm understanding it correctly, he got hit with sexual abuse or sexual assault, not rape. And New York has this kind of distinction between the two. And so Trump's point was, dude, you got on your national syndicated television show and called me a rapist. That's a fail. And in order to drive that point home, taking him to court, suing the company with it, and winning $15 million on it. I guess the first question is, should Stephanopoulos have done that? I mean, that's a little, I don't know, that rubs me the wrong way, him bringing a rape survivor on. It's like if I was molested when I was a kid, when I was younger. And someone brings me on and says, hey, you were molested as a kid. How are you backing this person that was so-and-so? Basically, you're bringing up my history and dragging it into the mud in order to make your political point as you go after me for it, especially for something like rape. Give me your take on this. I guess give me your take on both. A, you're a lawyer. The case.
No,
B,
I'm not a lawyer.
Oh, I thought you were a lawyer. I'm sorry.
No, I went to law school. I went to
That's
law
what
school.
it is. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not
So
a
I
lawyer.
wasn't entirely in the ball. I was entirely in the weeds.
See, there you
Okay.
and George Stephanopoulos go, man. You
Okay,
accuse
fair
me of such a despicable thing as being a lawyer. Anyway, go ahead.
Fair enough. All right. So, at for one, do you think George Stephanopoulos should have bought it in this angle? Should he have hit her like this?
I don't think that's a bad question if the basis of the question is factual or is accurate. Asking if, in fact, Donald Trump had been found guilty of rape, asking a woman in this political environment, how can you back someone who did something as an act that was as deplorable as the act that was done to you? I don't. He's asking for consistency of thought. He's asking for. I don't have a problem with that. The example that you used is to me is different. If the question is being asked for sensationalization, to sensationalize that to me is a huge problem. But to ask the question, if the question is factual, to demonstrate, is there some inconsistency in your thought? Is there some hypocrisy in your thought? I don't have a problem with that. And it's so George Stephanopoulos just got sloppy. And you know, in the chair in which he sits, you can't be sloppy. You don't you just can't be sloppy. And I'm trying to find quickly here what a judge concluded that that Stephanopoulos, I'm trying to find in the article where the judge, they made this incredibly, a judge concluded in 2023 when dismissing Trump's countersuit against Carroll that the claim that Trump raped her was substantially true, quote, end quote, substantially true. The judge wrote that Trump, quote unquote, raped her in the broader sense of that word, as people generally understand it, though not as it is narrowly defined by New York state law. I find that to be incredibly interesting.
Yes, it's called being in New York. It's called being in New York.
So what he's saying is, by the definition of rape, by the code in New York, he did not rape her.
Right.
But as people generally understand the term, he did.
Oh, we are so going to disagree on this. Look.
No. You and I aren't disagreeing on this.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
No. I was just quoting what the article, what the judge said. I find that to be incredibly confusing.
Yes, because I get the sense that I'm in New York. I want to convict Trump. And so I'm going to, because look, at the end of the day, the way that people understand rape is there's a difference between rape and sexual assault. So when,
huge difference.
When Franken, for example, well, that's not even sexual assault. They just got rid of him because they were doing the B2 phase. But let's say rubbing up against somebody. Okay, that's assault. But that's not what people would think of as rape.
Correct.
I mean, it's a bit different. And the judge is murkying the waters with that big time. I mean, to put it mildly. I mean, but the judge did make the point of saying, under New York law, it's sexual assault.
Right.
Stephanopoulos.
So George Stephanopoulos was incredibly sloppy with his language, and I don't say that in any effort to give George Stephanopoulos a pass. That to me, he didn't say, how can you vote for a man who was accused of rape? How can you vote for a man who allegedly raped somebody? He could have even quoted the judge and said, but he just came out and said, how can you vote somebody that supports somebody who was convicted of rape? And that is not true.
Yeah. That's $15 million.
That's $15 million are wrong.
$15 million are wrong. By the way, we figured out where the drones were coming from. This was just reported. Apparently, Chris Christie has been on a binge. He's found weed, and he's been hitting up the local McDonald's pretty heavily. Speaking of false,
that's a lot of DoorDash right there.
I know, right?
That's a lot of DoorDash.
I know, right?
Krispy Kreme. That's a lot of. That's a Krispy Kreme. That's a lot of DoorDash there, buddy.
That's a lot of DoorDash, man. The story that I hit over the weekend that I am enamored by is CNN. So CNN, you've had to see the fake piece by now where CNN reporter goes in, what is her name? Clarissa Ward. Clarissa Ward has been known for faking stuff for a while. And she comes in as if out of the blue, finds a jail, and she walks in, apparently, and discovers an inmate. The guard shoots the lock off the door. The inmate doesn't move. Now, right off the bat, shooting the lock off the door is outrageous. It's absurd. And then for the person in there not to move, meaning despite the fact that the lock had been shot and the gun is like a few feet away from his head, he's shocked to see the reporter come in. All right, I'm going to fast forward to the other part. So he gets taken into the light of day. And he's like, I haven't seen the light for months on end. He looks directly into the sky.
He's like,
oh, thank you. Right, right, right.
On the line, like a
All
vampire.
of this
He
stuff.
would have been like a vampire. No, not the
Right. Yeah,
son.
right. He
No,
would have been
not
completely
the
shocked.
son.
He's
Right.
in a new jacket, very clean, has
Mhm.
a haircut,
Mhm.
manicured nails.
Mhm.
And as opposed to some of the other people that were pulled out, they were completely emaciated because they hadn't
Mhm.
eaten in God knows how long. So Twitter immediately calls foul on this. The Twitter notes was like, this is nonsense. This is clearly made up. This is clearly somebody making this up. Now, CNN backs up their piece, but another article comes out called Verified Site, and they search the public record to get more information on this particular guy.
Mhm.
So it says Verified Side team search public records, the name of Adele Garbal, to verify the circumstances and duration of the detention, but found no results. Garbal, who claimed to hail from Homs, whose dialect supported this claim, prompted further inquiries into the city. The team discovered that his real name is Salama Mohammed Salama, first and last name the same. That's a little strange, but okay. A revelation that brought shocking details to light. Salama, known as Abu Hamza, is the first lieutenant of the Syrian Air Force intelligence, notorious for his activities in Homs. Residents in the Al Bayada neighborhood identified him as a frequently stationed at the checkpoint in the area Western Entrance, infamous for its abuses. His Abu Hamza reportedly managed several security checkpoints in Homs. He was involved in theft, extortion, and coercion or coercing residents into becoming informants. According to the locals, his recent incarceration, lasting less than a month, according to him, he had been in there for like 4 or 5 months, whatever. It's less than a month, was due to a dispute over a profit sharing from extorted funds with a higher ranking officer. This led him to be detained at one of Damascus cells, as per neighborhood sources. So the guy who they're claiming was just thrown in, left to be there for months. Come to find out, he was there for a month at the most, and he was one of an unsavory group that was in that jail cell. CNN clearly put that man in that cell for this piece. I don't know if they look further into it than that. And Clarissa Ward, who is known to be, sniffing Syrian chemical weapons, apparently, like just inhaling a bag that's supposed to be laced with it, threw her body to the ground when there was supposed to be an attack that never took place. And by her own admission, had become radicalized where she was sending letters, I believe, to the Obama administration complaining about them basically not overthrowing the government. This is the person who they sent to Syria. Give me your take on this. Have you seen anything this shameless, I guess is the word for it? I mean, for the most, quote, trusted name in news, to be doing puff piece interviews with diversity-friendly terrorists, and then to turn around and do a piece that is obviously fake. It's pretty outrageous, even for CNN. Give me your thoughts.
Well, have I seen anything like this? Yes, we have. I would have to ask if she went to the Brian Williams School of Journalism. Because Brian, if you remember, Brian Williams, former anchor of NBC's nightly news, I think it was NBC. And if there's a judge in New York that wants to tell me I'm wrong, but that it was another network, I apologize. But I think it was NBC. I don't want to be George Stephanopoulos here. Anchor of NBC News was found to have engaged in similar behavior. So yes, we have seen this before. It's called manufacturing consent. This is something that mainstream media has been involved in for a very long time. In fact, there's a piece that I reference fairly often. It was an NBC piece. Ken Delanian. In fact, Ken Delanian was again. If I'm not.
I hate to interrupt. I know that piece. I reference that piece all the time, where Ken Delanian is triumphant, like he's triumphant about Biden lying to the American public. Is that the piece?
Right. Yeah. Let me see if I can quickly. Yeah. NBC News admits it's in a break with the past.
Right there.
U.S. is using intel to fight an info war with Russia, even when the intel isn't rock solid. It doesn't have to be solid intelligence, one official said. It's more important to get out ahead of them, the Russians, Putin specifically, before they do something. So NBC is admitting in this piece, we are lying to you.
Yeah.
You even had what was it called? The Office of Special Plans. Plans or programs, I can't remember which, in the Pentagon, that was taking raw intelligence, spinning it into fact, releasing it to the West to promote the whole idea of weapons of mass destruction. That's it. History is replete with examples of mainstream media doing these very types of things to manufacture consent amongst the American people. That we keep hearing on the major networks as they were talking about former now Syrian President al-Assad gassing his own people. Those stories have been debunked. So the whole Russian election,
Trump and Russia, right?
All of that, Russiagate, all of that has been debunked. But they still will use those lies when it works to further their agenda. So history is replete. Calissa Ward just got caught again. So, and would you and I, would you or I, or you and I, would we get a second chance? Would we get a third chance? And it's not a matter of being wrong. It's not even a matter of being sloppy in your language, like Stephanopoulos. This is contrived. Ken Delanian, what used to write for the LA Times, until it was found that he was sending his stories to the CIA, having his stories cleared by the CIA before they were published, and not telling his editors. And so instead of him being banished from journalism forever, he interestingly and conveniently has found a very nice, secure home at NBC.
Yeah, the CNN, again, that story, I had that story on tap because I was always enamored by that story. I was fascinated by that story because under normal circumstances, you would think that the journalists would be outraged that the White House is lying to them. Right. And their point of view was, this is just fantastic new way of warfare. It's like, what are you talking about? You are literally being lied to. And your response to that is, bravo, Joe Biden, bravo. It's like, dude, how on earth? At one point, they said they were doing it to get in Putin's head. And I'm like, and as I'm reading the piece, I was like, how is it getting into Putin's head? He knows you're lying. Right. And then they point out, they said, but Putin already knows. Meaning, even in the article, they had to point out, but they've already pointed out that Putin already knows that you're lying. So, there's very little effect that this is having. No, there is an effect. It's to the American public. It's to the American public. Just outrageous. That article, I can't believe they wrote that article. They wrote that article.
A, you can't believe they're doing it. B, you can't believe they admit that they're doing it.
Right.
And then you can't believe that they're getting away with admitting that they're doing. Where I don't think they is are, the outrage?
I don't think they are, though, because if you look at, the mainstay for media is their credibility, right? At least I would argue.
It's supposed to be.
And if you look at the way that the public considers media, it is low. You can hear the media that people talk about all the time. Oh, our credibility. What was the woman who just was complaining? I think she used to be on 60 Minutes. She was one of those people that said Trump was working with the Russians and that the laptop was fake. And then she decries the fact that media has lost its credibility with the American public. I guess, but see, that's the rub, though, right? They still have the ability to shape public opinion when they need to.
Right.
That's the rub.
And it, because with the validity and the truth of everything that you've just said. You experience this as well as I do. You're at a gathering, you're talking amongst friends, and because you do the research that you do, you want to say to someone, well, no, Joy Reid is wrong. Kamala did not run an exquisite campaign. And then people, man, they want to take you in the yard and stone you. How can you? And then ignoring that article that was in the New York Times just last week, where the campaign came out, the campaign workers in Philly came out and said, we had to take it upon ourselves. Did you see that piece?
What's the piece?
Oh, man. Well, give me 1 second here. There was a piece in the New York Times. Harris staffers say they were mistreated on the campaign. Okay. So Black Harris staffers say they were mistreated on the campaign, blames leadership for taking base for granted. Black Harris staffers are accusing the campaign leadership of mistreatment and, quote, outright racial discrimination, end quote, in a damning new article outlining numerous allegations against the now defunct campaign. So basically what you have, and this was published in the New York Times last Sunday. So what you have, these staffers are saying that one of the reasons why Harris lost Pennsylvania was because they didn't go into the Black neighborhoods and the neighborhoods of color in Philly and campaign, that money was diverted to more comfortable, and that's my wording, suburban neighborhoods. So when these folks realized that that the campaign had not gone into the hood, they took it upon themselves to do so. So as they're in Philly knocking on doors, people are coming saying, no, nobody's come to us and asked us for our vote. No, nobody from the Harris campaign has been here. This is in the New York Times. And this is not a story based on anonymous sources. There are people in the story that say who they are and what their responsibilities were. Now, there are a number of references to, well, there are people who are speaking to us on the condition of anonymity because they are concerned about their futures.
Right.
But there are enough names in the story to let you know this story was not a myth. And they were meeting, they said that the campaign offices in Philly didn't have any money, they didn't have any chairs, they didn't have any desks, they didn't have the basic items that they needed to do their jobs. And that instead of meeting in those offices, they were afraid of being caught, so they met at a Dunkin' Donuts. And that they would it's in the New York Times. Black Harris staffers say they were mistreated on the campaign. And here's the other thing that I think is important about this. I understand that one of Kamala Harris's major mentors is Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read this story and you think back to 2016 in the Clinton campaign, it's the same damn story.
Wow.
Hillary Clinton lost Michigan because she took Michigan for granted and didn't campaign in Michigan. And she waited until the very last minute to, if you remember, maybe a day or 2 days before the election.
I thought it was Wisconsin, and she sent somebody to Wisconsin when they realized she had never been in Wisconsin, but it might have been Michigan too.
It was Michigan. It was Michigan as well. Yeah. And then she waits till the 2 days to bring Barack Obama into Philly, thinking that once he shows up, we'll just all fall in line. So what you're seeing with this, to me, is consistency of thought. That's what. So Kamala steals a page out of Hillary's playbook.
Oh, she picked the wrong page.
She picked the wrong
page.
She picked the wrong book.
Right. Dr. Wilbur Lee, man, I always enjoy talking to you. I swear to God,
Thanks,
I do. Dr. Wilmer Leon, he's a political scientist, nationally syndicated columnist. And give me the shows one more time, just so the audience would know. And I need to write these down.
Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon on, you can get that on YouTube, Monday through Friday, 10 to 11 a.m. And Inside the Issues, which you have been on, but we got to get you on the podcast, but we have a time conflict. Inside the Issues on Sirius XM, Saturdays from 11 to 2 Eastern.
My man, you have a good one, my man. Thank you for this. All right. Guys, if you dig this content, I want you guys to give it a like. I want you to share it, subscribe to it far and wide. And what is this? Subscribe to it far and wide. Also, I'm trying to reach 40K by the end of the year. I think we can get that. We're on our way to it. So definitely hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. If you really dig this content, you find yourself coming back here often, please feel free to support this content through PayPal, Patreon, and for that matter, Super Chats. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. Even if you want to take the piss out of me, I will read those also. I want to bring in my next guest. He has been a friend of this show for a while now, Dave Beatty. He is an Emmy award-winning producer and cinematographer, UFO researcher, and TV journalist and documentary filmmaker. How you doing, my man? You doing all right today?
Hey, yeah, Jamal. Appreciate the invite onto your show once again. Doing
Oh,
good.
always, man. Always appreciate you joining us. And today seems to be a damn good day to bring you on. You are a drone operator on top of that, in addition to being a researcher. And so I figured that's a win-win. In this scenario, have you been following the New Jersey drone thing? I mean, and at this point, it's been spreading all over the United States, not just Jersey, especially up and down East Coast.
Yeah, I have. I mean, it's truly interesting. I've been actually following what I would call the mystery drone story for about 5 years now, because this is not the first time that this type of incident has happened. This is probably the biggest. People have said that there's like hysteria going on now because there's so many people that are reporting seeing these things. But yeah, I mean, this is probably the biggest one that has the most press that I've ever seen.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's been all over. And it seems like, I got to be honest, I can't necessarily get my head around what's going on. There's a discrepancy between what is coming out of the federal government versus what is coming out of local governments. And so I played the clip the other day. You get John Kirby, you get Mayorkas, both of them saying, well, military bases or restricted airspace hasn't necessarily been invaded. And as I pointed out yesterday, that is patently not true. There's been 2 military bases at the time that I did that video that had drones on those bases and that people could see the drones. On another one, though, Wright Patterson Air Force Base had to close its skies the other day because of several drones that were in the Air Force Base. This is one of our main military bases. I want to play the clip because somehow TMZ got their hand on the clip of the communication that was taken back and forth among the pilots who were there, who was watching it, who was observing it. I'm going to play this clip. I want to get your take on this. This is pretty astonishing because for some people, Kirby made this point of saying, well, these are planes, these are vehicles. That's not what people are saying. The Coast Guard on the ground pointed out that there were 20 drones following, they used the term harassing their ship. Okay, well, those aren't 20 airplanes that are harassing your ship. Those are actually most likely drones. And there seems to be different types. So in one case, they're talking about ones that are 6 feet. In another case, they're talking about round balls of sorts that tend to hover for an extended long period of time. Now, those are the ones that are far weirder. And when they asked the federal government, they were like, well, we can't track them. We don't see, they're not picking them up in the way that they would typically pick drones. And so you seem to have different types that are operating. You have the traditional, just, hobby drones. You have the ones that seem to be more militaristic, the ones that are, I guess, much larger, because from my understanding, people don't really have hobby 6 feet, 8 feet drones. Those tend to be more government, military, some kind of operation. And then you have these other more mysterious ones where they can't necessarily see propulsion or anything like that. So at Wright Air Force Patterson Air Base, where they shut it down, I believe this was Friday, Saturday. This is what the audio came out, and I want to get your take on this.
Extreme caution for heavy UAS movement on the base. Security forces is handling the situation. Suggest at or above 1700 AGL. That we will maintain 3000 on our transition for med flight 8. And I gotta keep the lights down so that security forces can see. Roger that, no problem. Mission approved, sir. Approved, med flight 8. Med flight 8 tower. For med flight 8. Hey, sir, you're still approved through our Class Delta. After you leave, Columbus is going to sterilize the Class Delta as of 0330 Zulu. Patterson Class Delta is closed after your transition. I'm sorry about that. You got stepped on by other traffic. Can you say again? Yes, sir. Your transition is still approved. However, Patterson Class Delta is sterilized as of 0330 Zulu for heavy unknown UAS activity. Security forces is handling it, and Columbus is going to sterilize the airspace after you leave the Delta.
So he said Columbia is handling it, and then he says heavy UAP drone activity. Now, initially, well, he said UAS, but same difference. Initially, they pointed out that there were several drones that were on the airfield that caused the airfield to shut down its operations. That doesn't sound like hysteria to me, meaning these are Air Force pilots. These guys are trained observers. You would think that they would know an airplane from a drone. And for all of the talk of, well, this hasn't invaded restricted air bases, well, right for Patterson Air Force Base is obviously a restricted base. What is your thoughts on this? I mean, like I said, what piqued my interest were the discrepancies. I got to be honest. In the very beginning, I was like, okay, drones, so what? People are making a big deal out of this. And then as the story went on, it was like, okay, well, why is Kirby saying that versus what is obviously trained observers pointing out drones, whether it's the Coast Guard, whether it's the people who are in Jersey, whether it's Wright Air Force Patterson Base in this particular case. How do you frame this in your mind? Because I got to be honest, I don't quite know what's going on with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those statements by Kirby are patently false, as you just pointed out and demonstrated yesterday or the day before, with your statements about the ongoing incursions today into restricted military operations areas. People cannot fly drones in these places. In fact, a lot of the commercial drones, specifically DJI products, they prevent operators from flying in these areas. It's called geofencing. And if you try to take off, like the base area would be just a red box and you cannot get close to it. If you do, the system just stops, throws up a warning, and it won't let you go there. If you actually somehow got into that area, the drone would just land or would fly back. It won't let you go in there. So you would have to, you know, if it's say somebody with a drone they purchased, you would have to hack that, or you would have to build it yourself or buy a system that does not have that type of geofencing enabled to, so that you could fly it. But like, as you pointed out, a lot of these observations are bigger than what you would see buying commercially on Amazon. I mean, it's not a small drone. You're talking about something with a 6 foot span. So can an individual create that? Of course, you can build a drone with that kind of, what we call those heavy lift drones, so that you could affix some very heavy camera system to it. You know, you could purchase the parts and build a 6 foot wide multi-rotor drone, sometimes with 6 rotors or 8 rotors on the spars that come out from the center. So it's possible that these things are, you know, being created by some type of bad actor that's conducting surveillance. We don't know. In fact, you know, when we look at Wright Patterson on Friday, we say, okay, they basically had a problem. They had to shut down their Class D airspace, you know, all Friday night into Saturday morning for, you know, restricted flight. So it shut down a major operating airbase because of this is a national security issue. When you're shutting down one of our strategic air bases, I mean, that's a huge problem. And that's like an incursion into a sensitive military area. I mean, an illegal incursion. So, you know, the question is, you know, not, I mean, I could present to you, like, and your listeners, you know, a list of like 7 or 8 of these incidents. It's not just Wright-Patterson. It's not just New Jersey. This has been going on for like 5 years and is completely and utterly unexplained. I mean, I'll sit there and say, yeah, you know, you pull up these videos. Okay. If
are seeing.
Go ahead. If you want to play it.
No. I was just showing what they
Yeah,
look like
this
more
is-
than anything else, because there's so
So-
many different types. But
So
yeah,
keep-
please continue.
Keep in mind that most people don't go out and stare into the sky. They don't look at airplanes. They don't look at drones. They don't know what they look like. So when all of a sudden you've empowered the population to take their phone and go outside at night and look around and say, oh my God, what's that? Film it. So you're going to have a huge amount of misidentifications mixed in with actual good quality observations. And how do you separate that? It's almost impossible. I mean, unless someone captures footage of something that is clearly a 6 foot to 8 foot long wide drone, and you can definitively look at that video and say, yeah, I see the distance somehow. I mean, a light at night, first of all, it's almost impossible to discern what's behind the light. It's almost impossible to discern how far away it is. That means you don't know how big it is. So there's going to be misidentification. So just like, even though there's thousands of reports coming in, I think we just need to, like, okay, take it down and say, we don't know which of these reports is actually a dangerous, you know, surveillance of what we don't know. Okay. So let's so the ones where we hear from these military bases or law enforcement operations, those I'm going to take seriously, especially if it was a member of the public that brought it to law enforcement and they said, wait a second, we're going to go out and investigate this, because the facts of this case and, you know, the video are so astounding that it needs to be investigated. We need to figure out who's flying these drones, because obviously it's illegal, you know, coming into a military range, and somebody needs to answer to that.
Well, that's the other part, right? It's like we spend $1 trillion a year on the military. We have this sophisticated apparatus, and yet you get drone swarms and nobody knows what it is. And the Mayorkas, you know, of course, they went to Mayorkas, Homeland Security. Listen to what he says. Stephanopoulos, the one who's going to have to pay $50 million, he questioned Mayorkas on this one. We've heard from John Kirby before. I don't think I played this clip before. This is
Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us this morning. Can you clear up the confusion here?
Absolutely, George, and thank you very much for having me. There's no question that people are seeing drones, and I want to assure the American public that we in the federal government have deployed additional resources, personnel, technology to assist the New Jersey State Police in addressing the drone sightings. Some of those drone sightings are in fact drones. Some are manned aircraft that are commonly mistaken for drones, and we do see duplicative reporting. But there's no question that drones are being sighted. Let me set the record straight here, George. There are thousands of drones flown every day in the United States. Recreational drones, commercial drones. That is the reality. And in September of 2023, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, changed the rules so that drones could fly at night. And that may be one of the reasons why now people are seeing more drones than they did before, especially from dawn to dusk. And so that is the reality. But I want to assure the American public that we are on it. We are working in close coordination with state and local authorities. And it is critical, as we all have said for a number of years, that we need from Congress additional authorities to address the drone situation.
what do you think about this idea that this is, I hate to even use the term, a mass psyop, because that's what some people are saying also, that this is clearly the government. But in fact, I've heard so many different stories. You've heard people come out the woodwork saying the aliens are here. They're here. You've heard other people saying this is a mass psyop, whether it's going to be a false flag, Greer types. You've heard other people say they're looking for nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
You've heard other people say, oh, they're just planes. All of these things are just airplanes and just people playing around with drones. Like, there's so many different stories that came out at once. And I think part of that is because the federal government is effectively saying we don't know what it is. I mean, clearly, somebody is clearly breaking the law. I mean, they're inspecting military installations, several.
Exactly.
You report, and the beauty of this dovetails with your research. But I remember when you did the research talking about the drones off of California.
Yeah.
That were following the military ships and that had been going out for a period of time. Nobody figured out what those were either.
No.
And I got to be honest, those were far more mysterious than many of the ones that are coming up. And that was before what he's talking about, where September 29th, they changed the policy and they changed the rules and et cetera associated with it. Go into your earlier reporting for the ones in California, because those were fascinating. Give me your take on those.
Yeah, so if you rewind to July of 2019, the U.S. Navy operates in a so-called operations range, which roughly extends, 100 miles out into the ocean off of the coast of Los Angeles to San Diego. So if you go out there, the Channel Islands are out there. That's where the U.S. Navy practices their fleet operations. They had, maybe 8 destroyers out there conducting what they call a destroyer squadron special warfare tactics. So they're firing missiles, they're conducting radar operations, they're launching small craft, they're firing machine guns. So they're practicing everything that they do as a war fighting stance. During that time, in July, they started having these weird drones approach. Well, they call them drones. They didn't know what they were. They were lights. They were flashing lights sometimes. One of these lights, because they couldn't really see what was behind it. They weren't, I never got like a specific structure of what these were. They didn't say that these things had 4 propellers, for instance, or a fixed wing. They didn't know they were lights that would approach this ship. Oftentimes the ships would then go into what's called EMCON, E-M-C-O-N, which is emissions control. They don't want surveillance of their radars or their, RF radios and all that. They don't want a foreign adversary to come in and be able to snoop around and capture that if that's what's going on. So they darken the ship. They go into this, turn off your cell phone, basically. And these lights are flying around. And this happened on maybe like 5 or 6 nights in that July, night after night. And one time, one of these objects flew over the destroyer and then fired like a white spotlight onto the flight deck. So these things are not just a light flashing around. I mean, it literally had a huge spotlight that illuminated the vessel from above. So there's a lot of crazy stories coming out of that event. Now, okay, did the Navy figure it out? No. Admiral Gilday at the time, who was the chief of naval operations, said, we're aware of this, to the press. He said, we're aware of this, but we haven't figured it out. We don't know who's operating. There was conjecture that perhaps a Chinese flagged tanker that was in the area was launching these, and it's still a pretty good hypothesis. And I just want to bring this up because within the last year, 2 Chinese nationals one is in prison and the other is facing a serious prison term for doing what? Flying drones around sensitive military operations areas. So first of all, I'll tell you, because just think about this. The first guy was named, let's see here. I got a really crazy story about this. And so I'm just like, hey, man, who are these guys? Like, okay, Fen Young Shi, a 26-year-old Chinese national. So he was in Newport News flying a drone and the thing crashed into a tree or something. So this is the start of the story. I mean, so a neighbor called the police. The police start coming to, because they thought it was suspicious. This guy, doesn't speak English or, whatever. He's a Chinese guy. So the police arrive. This guy takes off. The Naval Investigative Service captures the drone. They then, okay, what is this drone? We're going to look at it. And they find out that this guy's filming the Navy shipbuilding base at Newport News, where they're constructing new warships. It's a military base you can't fly drones over this place. So this guy's filming this at night, and this is on the drone. So then they arrest him at, I believe, San Francisco airport as he's trying to board a plane back to China. So they arrest the guy, and he's charged under the Espionage Act, and he's facing like, I don't know how many, like a year in prison or something for this. So then that was like kind of earlier this year. So then the next guy, Yin Pao Zhao, I don't know if I said that right, a 39-year-old Chinese citizen was arrested December 11th, this month, 2024, for flying a drone over Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. So he flew his drone over the base in November, the same day as SpaceX was launching a spy satellite. So he was flying, again, can't fly over Vandenberg Space Force Base, And so he's accused of using a hacked drone, probably one that software was loaded that allows it then to fly past these geofencing restrictions into the military operations there. So he's filming. So he was arrested for the same exact thing. He was trying to board a plane back to China. So what's going on? Why? I mean, I'm just putting two people together. I mean, that's just two they caught. How many more are out there that are, I mean, is this some type of I mean, again, there's a lot of drones, there's a lot of bases, there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't know if that's the answer, but part of it.
Yeah, I'm not blaming. Just to be very clear, I'm not blaming anybody on this. It's just fascinating. Like, because for one, these things sound like military drones. Some of them do.
Yeah.
But see, that's the catch, right? It's almost like anything that's mysterious or that's interesting is going to be stuff within 99% of stuff that's not. It's like trying to find that one thing that's interesting. That's the rub, right? And some of the people have thought, okay, well, these are foreign actors. Well, the U.S. has explicitly ruled out foreign adversaries. These are not foreign adversaries. This is not U.S. military. And so if people say, okay, if it's not foreign adversaries, it's not U.S. military, then what is it? Because then it gets weirder. Because then it's like, okay, well, these things, some of these are in formation. The ones that were, let's say, chasing the Coast Guard, for example. Yeah. Okay, how did you get 20 drones together in order to chase the Coast Guard? And I don't think the Coast Guard is lying. That would be very weird for the Coast Guard to just make it up. So it's like, okay, so 20 drones. Okay, how many people got together with a drone swarm? Like, all of this stuff is very bizarre to me, right? And so when the federal government comes in, no, it's not a foreign actor. Okay. It's not the U.S. military. Okay. So if I take the one case for the Coast Guard, you're telling me that 20 people at least got together and chased a Coast Guard ship for how long? I mean, usually the drone battery lasts like 20 minutes. Like, all of this stuff is very bizarre. And the fact that the federal government doesn't quite get it, it creates question marks in a way that is not good. It's not good. It's freaking people out in some respects. From your point of view, I mean, you do drones for yourself. How long does the battery typically last? Because they're saying that the battery lasts on the stuff going from 8 hours, in some cases, from 6 to 8 hours, which is mind-blowing. Something that Tesla would definitely want to get his hands on, if that's true. How long does drones typically last when you're flying them?
Yeah, you had it right. I mean, you're talking 20 to 40 minutes. And this is for small, lightweight drones. I mean, obviously, as you get bigger and you have more resources, if you're constructing this stuff for, military or, manufacturing drones that are used in industry, for instance, you can get systems that then have more batteries, so you can. But I mean, we're not talking 8 hours. That's impossible. No. I mean, I take that back. I mean, there are some, hydrogen fuel cells. There are types of motors that can run much longer, especially if they're using a propellant versus just a lithium battery. So then you get into like the military types drones. And I mean, I've even suggested in the past, like, well, didn't anyone in our military start thinking about, wow, we should like create a little mini nuke motor like we do in our vessels at sea? They have nuclear propulsion, submarines and carriers. I mean, haven't they designed a little tiny nuke? I mean, when people say, no, they wouldn't do that, it's too dangerous, thing crash, like you have fallout. But I mean, of course, that then could just stay up there forever, right? Like, so again, and your point about 20 drones chasing the Coast Guard is the exact thing that we need to look at when we say this is not, Shen Zhao or whatever flying a DJI, doing. First of all, what's the guy doing? I mean, are these guys out there like because they're tourists and they didn't know? Like they're like at Disneyland, but hey, let's go over to like the military base and get some shots of the tanks. For then we can show them to our friends back in China. Like, I don't think so. So
that
first
is weird.
of all, that is happening. There are foreign adversaries that are conducting surveillance on our homeland. It's happening. I mean, I just showed you guys that. So the press hasn't looked at that. They haven't put that together, but there you go. So the other stuff is truly strange. I mean, these are, in 2020, I broke a story about the USS Kearsarge, which is a Marine Corps landing transport vessel that was conducting training off the coast of North Carolina. When they were out there, they even had a anti-drone system or anti-air drone system on the deck when they were approached by what they called drones that tailed the ship during the night and did these strange maneuvers behind the ship as it was going along. So they reported this up the chain of command. There was even a PowerPoint briefing that we received via FOIA on this. It was reported from one of the squadron commanders. So it's all on the record that this happened. They never figured it out. They didn't. It was not, oh, who's doing this off the coast, like 90 miles out in the ocean, flying this stuff around.
Well, see, that's what I mean when I say anomalous. How the hell did it get 90 miles out in the ocean?
Right.
Like, you would think that it would take another ship to do it, or you're talking about something that's more anomalous in its characteristics.
That's what they look at that because they think, okay, there's got to be a fishing vessel or something around here that's doing this. In most cases, they eliminate that. So there you go. Yeah, you're right. It's like, okay, how did this thing get 90 miles out there? It had to take off from another launch platform. But
wow. I mean, this gets into look, I'm a UAP guy, right? I mean, I am fascinated by this stuff. I was the correspondent for the network on it.
Yeah.
And, if you're thinking of like Elizondo and some of the other people who came out, most of these things are going to be normal. It's the 1% that I care about, or it's that 0.1% that I care about of exposing. And who knows? Maybe Jesus is returning, or maybe this is a more mundane solution. I have no idea. But I would say the federal government is not doing itself any favors by not necessarily being forward and straightforward with what they know. Yeah. And honestly, to your point, right? It is disturbing to me that they don't have more knowledge of what is taking place in our skies. And this is kind of what Congress is pointing to. Like, how can you not know what is going on in our skies? Like, take out any kind of UFO stuff. In fact, I almost prefer it to be a UFO because at the very least, it's like, as opposed to a terrestrial reason for it, and a terrestrial reason for it is either going to be a lot of people goofing around, which I have a hard time reconciling because some of the stuff seems coordinated, or for an actor. It's one or the other, right? It's either us or it's not us.
Yeah.
So, man, thank you for this, Dave. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate talking to you. I always appreciate when I get the opportunity to kind of geek out on this stuff. Dave Beatty, he is an award-winning, Emmy award-winning producer and cinematographer, UFO researcher, and TV journalist, documentarian, and filmmaker. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you, Dave.
Yeah, sure. We appreciate
Enjoyed these
having me
conversations.
on.
You have a good one, man. Be safe. All right. I would like to bring in my next guest. I have waited for this conversation for a very long time. Kofi Kwaku is an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at University of Johannesburg. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing all right. Thanks, Jamal. Long time.
Long time. I appreciate you coming on. Now, look, I want to apologize to you on the show. The last time I rushed, heard you off, I did not necessarily manage my time all that well. And as I said, that will never happen again. I appreciate you joining me, man. Thank you for this.
No, that's okay. You're welcome.
There is big news taking place in West Africa. Côte d'Ivoire is kicking out the French. And apparently Chad is following behind it. Chad has not even had an overthrow, and they are still following behind, kicking out the French. It seems that the sentiment from the Sahel states are spreading. How far is this going to go? And what does this mean in regards to this region that the French are now being shown their walking papers?
I think this is an excellent topic. Remember, you and I, for the past year and a half, we've been talking about this, and I kept saying, please, Jamal, with your host on the other side, saying, watch this, something is happening. We need to pay attention. We're a bit worried that it may not pick up if the Western powers were to squash it, but it seems like it's not pulling a momentum right across West Africa. And as I keep saying, it's probably going to come all the way down to Southern Africa. But what is important is it's such a huge information and news. And first, before we talk about where is it going to go, we need to say, what does it mean? And what it means is there's a great deal of sort of freedom energies that are now spewing out around West Africa. Since Mali managed to get the coup with the citizen-led coup, same thing happened to Burkina Faso with President Ibrahim Traoré, and then with Abdourahmane Chani in Niger, and we can see that it's also picking up in Chad, and of course Senegal. But all of them don't have the military. They're not all military coups. For example, in Senegal, there's a sense that Africans need to sort of assume their sovereignties, being economic, political, or especially military. And one area which is really kicking really well is that they just don't want to have foreign military on their territories anymore, in the country. So that sovereignty, I think it's a great way to start with on the military and security side of it. And they've managed to do it very smartly, especially Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, by sort of having an associated partnership with Russia. And with Russia's success and then strength in Ukraine against NATO and the United States, people were really comfortable and saying, we need to have this partnership. But it didn't mean that they wanted to have another a set of new military bases in their countries. And this is what the kind of trend and wave we see now going through West Africa. So from Mali to Burkina Faso, from Burkina Faso to Niger, and then we've seen in Chad with President Déby Itno, and then now with Diomaye Faye and his mentor Sonko in Senegal. So we can even, and now it's moved to Côte d'Ivoire, as you're saying. You've seen that this is a big deal, because I have to tell you, this is a huge surprise to me that the French naturally, without people complaining, they seem to have sort of withdrawn very quickly, and they may be sensing something. But as I said to you again, the big elephant in the room nobody's talking about is that deal, the sort of military base that Secretary Blinken and then the NATO heads have cut with Côte d'Ivoire to have a military base in the northwestern part of Côte d'Ivoire.
What is it going to, well, let's go to, I want to move, yeah, okay. What does it mean that, wait a minute, from my understanding, they were removing that military base at Côte d'Ivoire, or did I misunderstand that?
The French in July, last July.
The US still has their base there.
They have about 4 or 5 of them, and they were sort of downgrading them from 1,000 or more military to about 600. So they were progressively and steadily doing that.
I
But
see.
this announcement this week has been shocking to everybody. Saying, "Wow, what is really happening? Do the French have something in the basket they're hiding we don't know about, or have they not understood that they have to leave? They have to sort of clean slates and move away, and then start to have better relationship with African countries they used to colonize."
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, from your point of view, ECOWAS, the last time we had this conversation, when all of this first took place with Niger, ECOWAS was threatening to overthrow the government, which is, again, astonishing. I remember when it came out. All things being equal, those ended up just being threats. With this kind of changeover where you're getting the Sahel states that seem to be lumping into kind of a union of sorts, not necessarily one thing, but definitely working in tandem and working in unison. What does this mean for ECOWAS? I mean, for all intents and purposes, their threats failed. They didn't go through with this kind of takeover that they were trying to go with. So what does it mean for ECOWAS that they no longer have the control, or let's say no longer have the influence to influence these states?
I mean, this is huge. It's huge because what it means for ECOWAS is a loss of power, a loss of influence, but also, as you know, this weekend, in fact, yesterday, there was the celebration of, there was a meeting, a ECOWAS meeting, but they're hoping that they will have another meeting coming up in January to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And what else? What is it there to celebrate when ECOWAS, a 15-member organization, loses 3 and is about to probably lose a little bit more? So that's the real meaning there. It's a meaning also of shame, not being able to have consolidated the union. And people are now finding ECOWAS as an irrelevant institution, at least they're looking at it as a club of incompetent African leaders who are doing the bidding of France and NATO and foreign powers, rather than paying attention to the serious economic issues, because that's what it is all about. Economic issues and the mobility for people to move around and then improve their daily lives, deal with extreme poverty, unemployment. I mean, as you already know, unemployment in ECOWAS is huge. Most of the young people are just trekking to Europe, dying in the Mediterranean. And that is a shame that ECOWAS is not dealing with, as well as not dealing seriously with terrorism in those Sahelian countries. So it is a shameful position they're in. And the current president, who's now curating the sort of presidentship, if you want to call it, President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria, I mean, he's really in a very difficult position. They haven't been able to convince the 3 Sahelian states to come back. In fact, the Sahelian states are saying our decisions is irreversible. We've now established a confederation of 3 states, and there are rumors also, not just rumors, but it seems like something that could be officialized soon. The new president of Ghana, John Mahama, who was president before, now reelected, he seemed to have some sympathies with ECOWAS, and not ECOWAS, sorry, with the alliance of the Sahelian states. And if this really takes place, it gives access to the sea, to the Gulf of Guinea, to the Sahelian states, and then they start to build up that momentum across the region. It could be possible that in the long run, Cote d'Ivoire and other countries join the alliance. It could be possible, but at this stage, what it means, as I said, is it's a very shameful moment for ECOWAS, and then managing that shame, it's also very difficult.
Oh, that's fascinating. Because what it means, yeah, that's fascinating. If I look at this in a political sense, like taking out Africa for the moment and just any political situation, the people who are in the Sahel states at this point have defined themselves as being independent. We are not. We have thrown off the shackles of the colonial masters in this case. And if you're looking at ECOWAS, you say, you haven't. That is, it's almost like it's an indictment. It's almost like by definition of their positioning, their political positioning, ECOWAS is kind of stuck in the past in the way that it operates, in the way that I guess people would see it in Africa. It's this kind of relic of an organization as opposed to the Sahel states that have thrown off the yoke of their previous oppressors. Is that the way it's being viewed in Africa at this point? Meaning, is the reason that other groups are looking at maybe joining or going towards the Sahel states? I mean, for God's sake, Chad is even making this decision. There's been no, overthrow in Chad. They're moving because it seems that the political gravity is going towards West Africa in this sense. But correct me if I'm wrong. Am I right or wrong in that?
No, you're totally right. I mean, and then let me repeat it again. The major consequences, that's a huge setback for ECOWAS, for losing three top big countries. I mean, these two countries combined make about 2 to 3 million square kilometers. That's a large size. This is about a third of the United States. That's big. And a third of China, yes. And so that setback translates into a loss of credibility, a loss of influence, incompetence. So this whole thing turns around the reputational management that ECOWAS need to deal with. And it seems the people who are many call the club of incompetent African leaders are not seeing it. They're just meeting to drink champagne. Of course, the French are probably supplying that champagne. And as you probably already know, Nigeria is the top consumer of French champagne in Africa. So they probably have some of them there in Abuja that they're drinking. But in any case, it is difficult because it's both painful and laughable. And that the confluence of these two things are just painful because Africans are trying to find a way to get away from this sort of colonial mentality where Africans cannot, I mean, ECOWAS, for example, is not even supported by its own people, the countries at a rate of the funding. The European unions, funds literally ECOWAS. And France has a huge impact there, especially on Bola Tinubu, who is now the current president. In fact, President Tinubu was in Paris, I think, last month. And it turned out it was such a disaster to a certain degree because it didn't help in terms of reputational management. So, but why is the President Tinubu going there to talk to President Macron, who is probably his second or third son, right? And figure out what is he going to tell his own people here back in ECOWAS. And when young people are looking at that, and another element in this whole thing is that there have been many, many platforms where young Africans can express themselves. Thousands of them are now making analysis. They're now seeing, they're getting educated about what's going on in ECOWAS and West Africa. And they have enough of it about this neo-colonial situation, and they want to get out of it. That's one of the reasons they really are praising for the success of those three military countries now.
So the main things are going to be security and economy, I would imagine, as their main priorities. Have they started moving on those? How do they plan to, let's say, actualize those objectives from the standpoint of economy and, for that matter, security?
Yeah, they are doing it among themselves. There's now easy movement between the three countries, not only for goods, at least the goods they have economically, but also militarily, they're supporting each other. But they've also set many commissions, especially ministers who are looking at economic union. Now, they haven't left another economic union. For some reason, I forgot the name, forgot the translation in English, but in French it's called UMOA, which is another unitary union that allows them to use the franc CFA. I'm sure you've heard about this franc CFA issue. And the franc CFA is a monetary union. It's a currency that the French created to be able to sort of continuously colonize African countries that used to be under the old colonial rules. And that money is being used across 15 African countries. Probably when we get another chance, I'll be able to explain that, but it's some money that's been used to really keep Africans down, because the way it's used is not really favorable to economic growth, employment, dealing with development issues in those 15 countries. So those 3 countries are still member of it, but they're looking at finding ways to really create their own monetary confederation union. In fact, where all kinds of new bills circulating, but they haven't taken effect yet. But they're trying to do that gradually and then slowly so that they do it well. And as time goes on, they will be able to create a small monetary union that will help them out.
Can we talk about South Africa for a moment? I got to be honest, I am fascinated, or at the very least, I've become fascinated with South African politics, especially talking to you about it. The ANC is supposed to be a revolutionary organization. At the very least, it was. And it seems that they've transitioned into more of a governing organization as opposed to a revolutionary organization. But they're, what is the EFF or the EFF, I believe. There's another group, but there's also, what is the name of the group? It'll come to me in a moment. It's the apartheid.
Democratic Alliance.
Thank you. Democratic
Alliance.
So the Democratic Alliance was merged on some level into the government of the ANC because of the election result. There was the worst election result that the ANC had for like 30 years. That's the entire time they've been in operation. How has that gone? I mean, because I got to be honest, I always thought that the Democratic Alliance was a stalking horse in that government and that it was a horrible choice, allowing the Democratic Alliance to be in the government. But I could be wrong. I don't live there. What has been going on in South Africa recently in the government, in this kind of coalition government that's been formed?
Look, it's been a mixed, some kind of a mixed analysis. Many people, in fact, think that, you know, the ANC has been duped, that in fact, it's not the ANC that's now ruling. The government of national unity is now being ruled by the Democratic Alliance. In fact, there is a very interesting profile interview launch, FT Financial Times launch this weekend with Ellen Ziller, who is the chair of the Democratic Alliance. Very interesting article. If you get a chance, take a look at it. However, what is more important is that it at least the ministers of the Democratic Alliance and other parties are doing extraordinarily well in terms of publicity, you know, making people believe that they're doing really well. They're just delivering in less than 100 or 200 days, and they're just using the media. They're on TikTok, they're on WhatsApp, they're just getting their messages out. Yeah, and they're overwhelming informationally, strategically, they're overwhelming the African National Congress. I mean, the president has this, President Cyril Ramaphosa has this way of communicating with his people by newsletters. He gets out a monthly newsletter, a weekly on Monday newsletter, which I think it's not enough. You should be able to speak to your people directly. You know, as a former president of Mexico used to take 2 or 3 hours every Monday, or even, in fact, every day or so to talk to people. And so the DA, the Democratic Alliance, and their ministers have managed to be very cleverly organized, and then they're really leading the front when it comes to informing people what are they doing. I mean, especially you take 2 of them, the one at the Home Affairs, which deals with, you know, visas and all these things. They're trying to cut a deal to have free visas for Ukrainians to come to South Africa, for example. And that really that irritated a lot of Black people to figure out you can't get visa from our own brothers in Zimbabwe, you know, in Namibia and Malawi, but you're cutting a deal with, Ukraine. And so that created a little bit of you know, controversy, but they're doing their work. You know, so the African National Congress is really, really under pressure to prove something. But the new ministers who are not from the African National Congress are putting a great deal of pressure on them. And there's a sense that things are now moving a little bit, so people are attempting to deliver. And I've noticed also that the president himself finally has come out. This past week, it was in KwaZulu-Natal, one of the provinces in the sort of southern eastern part of the country, telling the people there, look, I love this because it was quite blunt. He said, look, wait, it's not enough to have a motto of the province that says, this is a province where the sun rises, right? Because that's one of the motto. He said, it should be a province where we build cars, we build this, we create jobs for our people. These are the kind of things we want to see. And it was a bit blunt. This is the first time I heard him saying that. So he's now under pressure to deal with economic issues. I mean, as you know, some of the biggest challenges, which we call here in a jargon, Afropocalypse, which means the biggest challenges that the continent is facing as Afropocalypse, extreme poverty, extreme inequalities, extreme unemployment, crime, and then corruption. These five are the big horses of the Afropocalypse. There are a lot of more like xenophobia and so forth, but these are really big issues. And South Africa hasn't been able to grapple with them very well, especially over the past 15 years. Economic growth is really not going anywhere. I mean, this is an oxymoron. As a young man at the World Bank, I hear this thing in South Africa where they're talking about negative growth. I said to myself, for goodness sake, what kind of oxymoron is this? Is this growth? It can't be negative. We just grew minus 0.2. It just grew, and it doesn't make sense. So the language is very cryptic. But what is important is they're trying their best. People are very unhappy right now, especially the majority of Black people think things are not going well. And the new party called the Mkhonto Sizwe of the former President Zuma, which is now the number one opposition party and the top party in the country, that sort of give a shoulder push to the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, who just had this weekend, last Sunday, they closed their big December meeting. And their president, which they call him the Commander-in-Chief, President Julius Malema, is also under huge pressure to change the nature of his governance and his leadership, because he's lost close to the top 10 of all the people who were leading with him. So it's a big time fragmented issue. South Africa is really going under a lot of crisis and turmoil.
I'm curious, if you had to look at Africa as a whole, and I know that's difficult, the second largest continent, it's a slew of different countries in its totality. But if you have to look at it as a whole, what is the thing that is causing the economic, let's say, duress in the country, or on the continent itself? Like, what if you had to put, and to make it more simple, for South Africa itself, what would be the thing that's the main issue in regards to economic stagnation in South Africa, or for that matter, even in West Africa?
Yes, excellent question, Jamal. That's one of the reasons I use the term Afropocalypse, because it goes right across. They all have similar symptoms and deeper crises that they all share. All those five Afropocalypse issues that I've mentioned: extreme poverty, extreme inequality, unemployment, crime, and then corruption and all of that. They still have the same thing. But the biggest, the most important response to your question is the legacy of colonialism still remain. All these economic systems sort of have the structure, the infrastructures of these things. Everywhere you go, the sort of neocolonialism and capitalism have created all these things, even when they're sitting on an enormous amount of resources like South Africa. I mean, South Africa is 1,200,000 square kilometers, a small population of 62 million, according to the last census. Almost 3,000 kilometers of ocean, ocean side. I mean, you couldn't find any better places. The Chinese are looking at this place and saying, how in the world are these people enabled to grow economically? But we know it. And the answer is the neocolonial structures and economic system that still underpins the way this country is what's really creating all these problems. Very deep-rooted crisis. However, the people who still hold the economic powers don't want to change. And one of the groups is financing the Democratic Alliance. And people are saying we need to restructure the system so that people can have jobs, can create jobs. We change the structure of poverty, inequalities, and so forth. This is the answer for you. The same thing is happening in former French colonies in West Africa, especially in Cote d'Ivoire, my own country. In Mali, same thing. In Senegal, same thing. In Ghana, the same thing. So all these are sort of beset by these kind of structural, deepening neocolonial structures that are not going anywhere. And it's going to take a revolution, and that revolution is coming up. And I'm sure you've heard it. Mali has recently managed to pay off its debt to the IMF. Burkina Faso is doing the same thing. And we just heard rumors coming from Niger as well. I mean, in less than 2 years,
Wow.
Military government, whom everybody is insulting, is paying off their debts. But civilian governments in other countries haven't been able to do it. Something is wrong somewhere.
Wow. Wow.
It's incredible. I
Usually
mean,
the
this is,
IMF
and
is
it's not, it's really not, it's not an exaggeration. You can check the evidence is showing up daily. You know, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, they're doing their best to really find a way to have economic sovereignty, but also political sovereignty. They want to rule themselves. They want to have ways to represent themselves at the UN. They want to be a countries where people are free.
I'm glad you brought that up. We have about 2 minutes left. The UN Security Council. Is Africa going to get a place on the UN Security Council?
I don't think so. I don't think so now, because I got to tell you why. You know, Africans themselves have to agree on who's going to be there. Is this a voice? Is this only one voice that's going to represent Africa? And if you do that, it really dilutes the power of all these 55 or 54 countries. Now, 54 according to the UN, 55 according to the African Union. It dilutes all these powers. And Africans are looking for, the last one I was hearing was 2 seats. And you ask yourself, like, who came up with this nonsense idea, 2 seats? You have 54 big countries. Africa is 30 million square kilometers. About, let's say, what, 4 times the United States and China. 2 seats. And then, of course, the US is saying, we're going to give you 2 seats, but without vetoes. Anyway, that's my closing point.
Well, at that point, that's not really right. That's not really a seat at the UN Security Council. Then that's something else. Kofi, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this. It's great rundown, it's very rare when we get to have a conversation about Africa and the States, and so
we should
a legacy. More. Well, right, it's a legacy of outlines, and I always appreciate being able to connect with you to discuss this. So thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks always, Jamal.
Oh, absolutely, man. Kofi Kawaku, he's an Africa analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Be safe, man. Have a good one.
You're welcome.
All right. We have a moment before our next guests come in. I'm going to say, if you dig this content, like it, share it, subscribe to it. My goal is to reach 40K by the end of the year, and damn it, it's a goal, but I think we can do it. It's a steep hill to climb, but I still think we can do it together. So definitely share this content, subscribe to it, hit the emergency notification bell. I pop in at all hours of the day and night. I'm an insomniac, and so it could be 2 a.m, and I'll be out here doing the news. So definitely hit the notification bell. I do not expect you to be up at 2 a.m., but just in case you are, right here. Also, if you really dig the content and you find yourself coming back here often, you can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. All of it, in real terms, helps the show. Even if it's $1, fair enough, it helps the show. All of it does. Even if it's a like for the video, even if it's a share for the video, all of it helps the show. And you have my deep appreciation for doing any of it. Honest to God, you do. My guests will be up shortly. We're going to have a conversation with KJ No. There have been right many events that have been taking place. KJ hit me up when the impeachment item came up, and KJ pointed out that it's not exactly in the way that it's being reported. Yes. Yeah, it's not exactly the way it's being reported. So I want to bring in KJ. He is the one and only, easily one of my favorite people to talk to, KJ No. He's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He was contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. KJ, welcome to the show, my man. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Pleasure to be with you.
No, man, it's a pleasure to be with you. You are on the West Coast, so this is more painful for you than it is for me. But I do appreciate you joining me. I really do.
It's always a pleasure to be with you.
I got to start at the impeachment. Man, South Korea gets an applause from me like nobody's business. In a sea of bad news, South Korea has been the actual good news item. And so just to give a primer, the president comes out one day and calls martial law. I think it's like 10 o'clock at night, out the blue, declares martial law. Effectively, I am a dictator of South Korea now. And he refuses governmental assembly in his decree. Basically, the parliament or the National Assembly can't meet. Protesters can't protest. The media is now under the auspices of the presidency, basically under the auspices of the government. And his excuse for this was, well, North Korean has infiltrated the other party. There was also a conversation that took place recently, or a report, that because they didn't do anything about Chinese spies, that he needed to take action to defend the democracy by destroying the democracy. I mean, just outlandish stuff. So fast forward to the police get involved. Well, for one, the National Assembly meets anyway. They vote down the decree. 4 hours it takes them for him to finally call off his goons who had basically tried to prevent them from voting down his decree, having South Korean public stand there with chairs, cameras, any and everything that they could in order to create a barrier to allow the National Assembly to get its vote in. Just astonishing of the government of the South Koreans to do that. Fast forward. A police investigation is open. The defense minister is detained. The president is not allowed to leave the country, which is, again, a weird spot for a president to be. You get the situation where the defense minister gets arrested. He tries to kill himself with his underwear. He tries to choke himself with his underwear. That didn't work. And the president, there's an impeachment vote. The first impeachment vote doesn't go through because they didn't have quorum. The opposition party walks out, or the party of the president walks out. Second time around, there's such a public backlash at what the president tried to do by all elements of South Korea that the president is impeached. And I just saw that many of the leaders want to step down from the party, and apparently the party's figurehead, or the main leader of the opposition party, or of the president's party, has stepped down. I believe this was yesterday or over the weekend. Did I get that right? I just want to make sure I got this right as a primer for the audience before we move into the other parts of the story.
You're absolutely right. The PPP party, the leadership, the Supreme Council, they've all resigned. And then the leader of the party, Han Dong-hoon, who is actually who used to be very, very close to the president, has also resigned. So the PPP party is in a complete leadership crisis, as is, without exaggeration, South Korea itself.
So is South Korea in a crisis at this point? Because it seems that the entire political space is has organized around this notion that the president was wrong. Meaning it's not a situation where there seems to be political disarray. It seems that politically everybody's on the same page. This is outrageous. This is outlandish. This cannot be allowed to happen, even to the point where all of these people effectively resign. That's part of the president's party. Or am I getting this wrong?
No, you have it right. People have resigned. Yoon's top cabinet has been apprehended or is under suspicion or in the process of being indicted. And so, there's massive churn happening, massive change happening. But there are a couple of ways to understand this. The first impeachment vote didn't work. And, just going back to the original martial law rescission vote, the National Assembly members, they came out, partly in their pajamas, they're running over fences. There was even a visually impaired legislator, a blind legislator, who, rushed out in the middle of the night, and she tried to get past these obstacles. She couldn't because she was blind. But she says that, in my heart, I pressed that yes button a million times, so that shows you how intense people were feeling. There's other images gone viral, a woman legislator, she's fighting with a special warfare officer, tussling with his gun, so this shows you the kind of stakes and the, passions that people were feeling, because martial law, I've said this before, is probably the scariest word in the Korean language. It means that ordinary life is over. Everybody has been inducted into the military, and you will do as you are told. That's what martial law means. And the last time it happened, 44 years ago, people fought with their lives, and they certainly don't want that again. So that tells you how extreme this situation was. And then it became very clear that this was not simply martial law, not simply a martial law declaration, but that it was not only unconstitutional, but that it was an act of rebellion, that it was an act of sedition. This was in the Koreans, they call it neran, which means insurrection. Essentially, he is essentially there. He is in the process of being charged with insurrection, he and his lieutenants. And so under those circumstances, there was the first impeachment vote, which the PPP ruling party, his party, walked out of. And that is, that is a kind of an insult to the entire population. The second impeachment vote was successful. 12 people of the PPP party crossed barriers in favor of the impeachment, although the PPP party came out officially and said that we oppose the impeachment. And so now it goes to the Constitutional Court. Jamal, I think your mic is muted.
Oh, I was letting you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was
So
muted
now-
while you talk. I didn't want any of the background. Oh, they're knocking at the downstairs somewhere. I'm sorry. I didn't want it to bleed through.
Got it. Sorry. Yeah.
So
After the impeachment, impeachment takes it to the Constitutional Court. Now, the Constitutional Court has 180 days, and the clock has already started to either accept the impeachment or to reject it. Now, currently there are 6 seated justices on the Constitutional Court, which has 9 seats. So there's only 6 out of 9 currently seated. They technically do not have a quorum, but they've decided to take the case on anyway. Now, in order for the impeachment to be sustained, you need 6 out of 9 justices to agree to the impeachment, to accept the impeachment. And
so they need all 6.
They have to get all 6. And they've just appointed the lead justice of the Constitutional Court. And he was appointed by President Yoon Suk-yeol. And to all extent, he is probably a diehard Yoon Suk-yeol, loyalist. And so there is, there's some, it's going to be an uphill battle. Now, to complicate that, there are 3 investigative agencies that are currently investigating the president. That's the CIO, it's like the Inspector General. There's the Prosecutor's Office, and then which is like the Attorney General, and then there's the police. Now, all 3 institutions are currently investigating the police, investigating Yoon Suk-yeol, and they're having a bit of a turf battle going on. And Yoon Suk-yeol has prevented the search of his premises. You know, a warrant for search and seizure was issued many days ago. Yoon Suk-yeol used his security team to prevent any entry, you know, tossed them a few scraps of paper and rejected the search warrant. And now there have been multiple summons that have been sent to Yoon Suk-yeol that he has to appear as a, as a witness in this case, or, you know, he has to testify in this case where he is the accused, and he has rejected them outright. He hasn't responded to the summons. So currently what it looks like is he's rejecting everything. He's going to slow walk everything. There are probably a whole bunch of procedural games that he's going to play. Remember, he was the prosecutor who impeached 2 presidents before him. So he knows this game. He's, you know, it's not the first time. This is not his first rodeo. He's done this before. So he's probably going to slow walk the process. And, you know, my concern is that if he slow walks it enough, there'll be other forces and other disruptions and possibly dirty tricks that could happen that could derail the process. And ultimately, what it all boils down to, the fact is that Yoon Suk-yeol is Washington's man. He is. The U.S. does not want to see him gone. And, you know, when he started this coup, when he initiated this coup, you have to ask yourself, you know, why did he think he could get away with such a brazen action?
Right.
And if you look back on history, there's a historical answer. We don't know if this is the case here, or at least it's not confirmed. But the historical answer is that every coup leader in South Korean history has had the backing of the United States. And so the question is this the case here? I think that you could make the case, and people like Colonel Douglas McGregor have, you know, argued that.
Look, it wouldn't shock me in the least, considering, look, I still think Trump is related to this. And reason, I've said it before, Trump, in the last time around, he got so much criticism for willing to make the deal with North Korea. And the deal that he made wasn't shocking. He stopped doing the simulated attacks on North Korea. And the US media flipped out. Oh my God, I can't believe you're stopped doing simulated attacks against North Korea. It's like, what do you mean you can't believe I'm not doing? Like, it's just bizarre the way that this country's orthodoxy works in regards to war and peace. It's flipped on its head. War is kind of the norm. And anybody who's coming in saying, okay, well, I don't want to have wars in this case, those people are bucking the orthodoxy. So I wouldn't necessarily be shocked if this is one of those ways of trying to basically instill what they consider to be gains being that particular person or that leader not believing that South Korea as a democracy would be as obsequious as they would be under a dictatorship. But putting that to the side for the moment, quorum, who makes the decision on whether or not quorum will be accepted or not accepted on the courts?
The Chief Justice does. So the Chief Justice,
they can do it on their own.
The Chief Justice made that decision because traditionally 7 justices is the quorum. You need 7 out of 9 justices seated in order to examine a case. But there was a case just before that where they accepted to do a case with only 6 because there is a turf fight over appointments right now, and that's a whole nother kind of story there. But because of this turf fight over the 3 empty positions, they decided to accept to see a case, a different case with only 6 justices. And having set that precedent, they decided, okay, then we can go ahead and see the presidential, impeachment case with only 6 justices. But it's tricky, right? Because it requires every single justice to agree in order for the impeachment to be sustained. As I said, there are already Yoon Suk-yeol loyalists on the bench who have been appointed by him. And then, the you see, on one level, this case is an open and shut case. It is clearly impeachable because the president is caught on camera declaring martial law without any justification. We have images of police and special warfare troops smashing into the National Assembly. We have, reports that, National Assembly members, the order was given to pull National Assembly members out of chambers to prevent them from voting. All of these are extra constitutional, violations, so this is an open and shut case. The question is, why hasn't Yoon already been apprehended and arrested? And why would this take, 180 days to resolve, which is technically the amount of time? So on one level, it's really, really simple. It's really simple that we have all the evidence we need. But right now, there's a turf battle among 3 different agencies. They say they're looking for evidence. Evidence doesn't seem to be produced. All these agencies have conflicts of interest because there are many loyalists inside these agencies. So there's actually room for, obfuscating the investigation. And then there's an entire timeline issue which comes into play, which is that the Constitutional Court has 180 days to render a decision, but at the same time, the main opposition party leader is also facing a bunch of charges as well that could take him out of running if there were a snap election to be held. So there are all kinds of games being played right here.
So in the United States, the president has certain powers against, let's say, prosecution. And the Supreme Court eventually just made the president pretty much king here in the States. How does it work in South Korea? I mean, for all intents and purposes, as it is, right? How does it work in South Korea? Does the president have powers against, meaning, does the president have to be impeached and removed from office before he can be prosecuted? Or can the president be prosecuted in office? Meaning, could the organization similar to the FBI go after the president in South Korea? Or could the prosecutor's office go after the president in South Korea? Or do they have to wait for the judge or for the bench to get him out of office before he's fair game? How does it work there?
So technically, the president has immunity against all crimes or all indictments, except for insurrection. And that is what he has been charged with. Okay, you cannot get away with treason. And so he's currently being charged with treason in the Constitutional Court, and separately criminally, he has been charged with treason. So his immunity does not apply. And then also the fact that he's been impeached also makes it much easier for proceedings to move forward against him. But as I said, there are currently 3 investigative agencies with different agendas that seem to be conflicting or having turf battles. And that is also part of the problem. And then Yoon can also slow walk the entire process through the Constitutional Court because time is on his side.
But I don't get that one. If insurrection is one of the items that the president doesn't necessarily have immunity for, then why do they have to wait for the Constitutional Court to make a ruling? It seems that the police could investigate and go, like the idea, I'll give you an example. Well, Mayor Adams is mayor of New York. And I know it's not the exact same thing, a mayor and the president. But when the feds came to get his cell phones and everything else, Adams had no choice but to give up those cell phones. And I guess my thing is that the same thing would be true if they did that for any political official. It would be hard pressed for them to say, well, no, I'm not giving you my information, or no, I'm not letting you into my house. It would be outrageous for anybody to try to do something like that in the middle of an investigation. And that person probably would get shot, frankly, if they tried to stop them and they had a court order allowing them to do so. How is so he's using his own security personnel in order to prevent the police department from doing their job? Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct. Yes. So he's using the presidential security detail. It's like the Secret Service, and they're like a little mini army, and they're telling the police, you have no right to investigate. They're simply creating, they're simply cordoning off the presidential residence and saying you cannot enter. We're not going to give you any evidence except what we want to, and they toss them a few bones. But so it really is, there's a kind of turf battle going on. And then regarding the investigations, there are two parallel investigations. One is the impeachment investigation, or the process for impeachment. And then there's also the criminal investigation, which is for insurrection. So these are actually proceeding on separate tracks. The fact is, Jamal, there is enough evidence at this point to arrest the president. I mean, like I said, he's caught on camera declaring martial law. It's not like there's some secret document that they have to ferret out that shows that he, did it. He's on camera doing it. So there's all the evidence they need. But because of these turf battles, and because this is not simply a legal case, but also a political case with tremendous geopolitical ramifications, I think there's a little bit of, people are treading carefully, and also there's some, internal conflicts that are happening. So we have to watch this very carefully.
I'm curious, KJ. What else have they learned up to this point? They've had to. I mean, for them to press charges against the defense minister, former defense minister, and for them to actually agree to impeachment, meaning the first time around, his own political party didn't want to participate. This time around, there had to have been enough pressure on those people for them to say, okay, fair enough. What do you think it was that changed their minds, that brought them over and said, okay, he's so unbelievably guilty that even us who are part of his own party can't necessarily abide by what he was trying to do? What was it? Meaning, was there any releases that were like the bombshell thing that says, okay, fair enough, he's guilty? What was the thing that did it?
Between the first impeachment attempt and the second successful impeachment attempt, we saw a lot of disclosures through a National Assembly hearing, which showed that there had been attempts to kidnap National Assembly leaders. That seems to have come out in very, very clear detail. And then there was also a media person called Kim Oh-jun, and he said that these were not simply kidnapping squads. It wasn't simply kidnapping squads that had been deployed, but assassination squads had been deployed. And according to him, their mission was to kill Kim Oh-jun and Han Dong-won, the leader of the PPP, who would have been snatched and kidnapped. So kill the leader of the PPP, make it look like they were trying to make it look like that these were North Korean agents that had killed Han Dong-won, and that were trying to rescue the opposition leaders who he has accused of being North Korean, followers, and then, dig up North Korean uniforms and then blame it all on North Korea. So that was one set of disclosures that came out.
KJ, that's outrageous. That's outrageous. That is mind-blowing. He was trying to start a war.
He was trying, and that was the other piece that also came out, that the defense minister Kim Yong-hyun had sent drones into North Korea, and had also given orders to fire on North Korea in response to trash balloons, etc. And so it looks like there may have been this deliberate attempt to trigger a war with North Korea. And the only reason why South Korea is not simply under martial law, but in a sea of flames right now, seems to be the fact that, Kim Jong-un, was really, really chill and didn't respond to these intense provocations. So, if you watch this, it just gets more and more, absurd. I mean, it makes your average K drama, K thriller, K horror show look like some kind of cheap imitation. But there's some incredible things were going on. So possibly an attempt to trigger a war, possibly an attempt to assassinate and blame it on North Korea, and then most certainly, clearly, attempts to overthrow the constitutional order.
That is outrageous. I don't even know what to say about that. That is outrageous. I mean, that is so over the top. Like, that is just mind blowing. I mean, to be honest, all of this was rather ostentatious. I mean, the idea that you're going to come out and say this is now a dictatorship is, like you said, it's all on TV. It's not like he, was rehearsing it behind the scenes and they caught him. He came out and implemented martial law. And then, do you think he didn't expect, and this could be the last question, he didn't expect that level of pushback? Like, because that is pretty ballsy to just at 10 o'clock at night. By the way, this is now a dictatorship, just so you all know. And to go down your, edict 1, edict 2, edict 3, and have the full expectation that the military is going to back you in doing so. What did he expect the public to do in that? Did he just think that the public was going to say, okay, well, it's a dictatorship, we'll call it a day? Like, he didn't expect that level of resistance to him doing that. I'm just curious on what did he think was going to happen?
Nobody knows exactly what went through his head, but what we do know is that this was not an impulsive act. What we do know is that this was planned possibly for at least 18 months before. Okay, apparently deliberations started July of 2023. And I think you could even make an argument that these were plans that were hatched right at the beginning of his presidency, when he moved the presidential house into the Ministry of Defense building, which is right next to the bunker that would oversee martial law. So there may have been some long-term planning here, but what made him think he could get away with such brazen actions, right? I mean, once again, I have to say that put yourself in Yoon Suk-yeol's shoes. He's going to ask himself, look, I'm having, political deadlock in the legislature. I can't get my agenda approved. They shaved 0.6% of the budget. This makes me crazy. They're trying to impeach me. They're trying to prosecute my wife. I will declare martial law. Once he's made that decision, what is his internal process? He's going to say, well, can I do this? Do I have the personnel? Do I have the loyalty? Do I have the capability? This was planned for 18 months, so they probably checked all the boxes. And there was probably one other question, which is, what do we tell the Godfather? There's a Godfather who oversees all of this. What do we tell them? When do we tell them? How much do we tell them? The fact is, they probably would have had to signal something to the United States. Otherwise, they would not have gone ahead with it. Because, to be honest, South Korea is a U.S. vassal. Its military is under U.S. control. Its politics, is tightly reined in, especially the politics of the PPP party, the ruling party, are tightly reined in with the United States and literally coordinated with U.S. geopolitical strategy. So if you think of all that, then probably his calculation may have been, and here I'm hypothesizing, he's saying, well, I have the capacity, I can get away with it. I have, the material military force to do this. And most importantly, the Godfather has nodded, okay? And therefore, we will simply ignore the pushback because that's what we have done up to this point. Because Yoon was already going down that road already. He was smashing unions. He was smashing media companies. He raided the opposition party leader, his house. He SWAT raided him 400 times. And he was just grinding the people underfoot. Yes, 400 times. And so
That
he
can't
was
be right. Wait,
no, no.
wait. He sent the cops to the
Yes,
leader of the opposition's house 400 times.
400 times. Yes, and raided it, tore the place upside down. Okay, so this was the kind of stuff that he was getting away with. He was trampling people, opposition, media, unions, civil society underfoot. And as he was doing that, all he was getting was receiving praise from the Western media and from Washington. They were saying he was the leader of a pivot state that was advancing democracy in the world. They held the summit of democracies in Korea, even as he was grinding people down. So you send all of that messaging, all of those strokes, you give him all of those strokes. Is it a surprise that somewhere in his mind he thinks, well, Washington says I'm doing the right thing, I can get away with this? And the proof of the pudding of that hypothesis is that when he declared the coup, what was Washington's response?
Silence.
Silence. We're watching this. It's not like a coup is illegal, this is anti-democratic. Their response is, we're watching this carefully, and our relationship with South Korea is ironclad. And they've repeated this over and over and over again. Our support for Korea is ironclad, meaning, we support you, or at the very least, we don't criticize you. And
Whatever
of course,
happens, happens.
whatever
Yeah,
happens,
whatever happens, happens.
Qui sera, sera, right?
Wow. KJ, man, fantastic breakdown. Thank you for this. KJ, no, he's a journalist, journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. He's contributor to a book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. KJ, man, thank you for this great breakdown. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely, man. All right, we have come to the end of the show. Oh, we have super chats today. All right, Vince Jump. Let me do this because I can't see that from here. There we are. Vince Jones, welcome to the family. Welcome to the family, Vince Jones. Welcome to the Thomas family. We have a JF super sticker. Thank you, JF. Really appreciate it, man. Thank you. Sparky. Let's see. Isn't this just part of the U.S. military intelligence shifting to drone to modernize? Isn't the Coast Guard ship deal just practice? Government plays deaf, dumb, and public freaks out the manufacturer consent. I don't know, man. I mean, who the hell is using 20 drones to chase down the U.S. Coast Guard? That's very random. And again, it seems like there are multiple things happening at once. There are some drones that are truly anomalous, where they don't seem to have like signatures. They seem to be like round. They're very strange. Those seem to be in the minority. And those are the ones that are typically talked about by ATIP or by Congress, etc. And every so often you see pictures of these kind of round metallic shaped drones that were talked about even in ATIP program, with Lou Elizondo's program. So there are those. Then you get the ones that just look like ours. Like they look like military drones for all intents and purposes. What they're describing, 6 feet drones, are rare. And yet they seem to be some of the ones in the literature that keep showing up also. Those are ones that are obvious. Those are they look like miniature airplanes in the way that they look and orient. Not to mention the lights and everything else that are on them. They look more terrestrial. Other things are going to be airplanes. Other things are going to be just smaller drones. I expect because people are looking up in the sky, they're going to be seeing much more than they would typically see. So you're going to get more reporting. I mean, there were like thousands of different reports. Even if I take out a certain percentage of those, hell, if I take out 50%, that's still a lot of sightings that are taking place, especially that seem to be taking place around a specific area, specifically Northeast. At this point, though, there have been reportings in Germany. There have been reportings. I showed the one at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. There were 2 other military bases where they saw them. I guess my point is, I don't know who is using swarm drones. Now, if we're talking about software that allows drones to communicate with each other, okay, well, that takes down the number of people that needs to be operating them. At that point, you're talking about, you might have one lead drone and the other ones are basically following along with the lead drone. And if you have software that can be managed where you don't necessarily have to communicate or control all of them at once, controlling one might be the same thing as controlling all of them if they are swarms. Now, to piggyback on China for a bit, and I'm not pointing a finger at China, I'm not doing that. China's drone technology is astonishing. If you've ever watched some of the shows that they do, it is mind-blowing what they've been able to do with drones. I mean, sometimes they have this stuff looking like waterfalls. It looks like 3-dimensional art in the sky. I mean, it is astonishing. By the same token, that's a different animal. They've been able to use drones in a way where they're not being picked up, where they go dark anytime you get close to them. Like, it's very strange flight characteristics. And again, we're not talking about all. We might be talking about 1% of the ones that are in the sky. That being said, shouldn't we know what's in our skies? Any way you look at it, like, take everything else out of it. Take out, as I always say, it's either us or it's not. If it is not us, meaning if it is not of human origin, okay, then that's super interesting. The threat level, I would argue, goes down on some level because it's not a foreign adversary, but still super interesting, and it's something we should know. If it is us, then we damn sure should know it because it sounds like it's surveillance. Now, if you want to say that there's some people in Jersey just playing around with drones, okay, fair enough. I don't necessarily think that describes all of them. It's weird if all of them are coordinating these drone movements in this particular fashion. But I got to be honest, I don't know. And I'm still stuck with this notion of why is the government giving a different story than what people on the ground are given. And by people on the ground, I'm talking about either in the military or, for that matter, in the Coast Guard. And yeah, I do take what the public is seeing, even if the public is going to get some of this stuff wrong. That stuff started somewhere. And I don't believe for a moment that all of these people who probably see and know what an airplane looks like, especially in some of the military capacities, are getting this wrong. I mean, I could play you an audio clip from an airplane that was, in the sky and was recording, talking to dispatch, effectively saying, look, there's something in our flight path. There's something in our flight path. This is not necessarily the typical flight that a normal drone that you would buy out of a store flies in. And so somebody is reporting, agreed, some of the stuff is nonsense. And I will tell you, my first thought was, okay, if it's military, like the way that they were describing some of the characteristics of it, it sounded like military. Either there's something going on that they don't necessarily want us to know, or they are just that comically inept that they don't necessarily know what it is at all, which again brings serious questions. And the fact of the matter is, it makes the situation worse when the government doesn't necessarily know what the hell is going on. Let's keep going. Sparky, federal government is trolling the public to manufacture consent. Congress can pass more draconian laws. So that's the other interesting point, that people, look, you have gotten hypotheses ranging from the aliens have returned, so they will be our overlords. You have people who are going that route. You have people going the route of, well, this is obviously a false flag attack that we've been predicting for the last 40 years. You've had people say that they were sniffing for nukes. You've had other people say that they're drones looking for other drones. Basically, that the US government is putting out drones and assets in order to find the metallic type drones. I was talking about the round ones that don't necessarily look like they have flight propulsion and are not being picked up by radar or any kind of typical military equipment, that they have drones out looking for those drones. I mean, but that brings up other questions of why now? The ATA program had been out for God knows how long talking about those metallic drones. Why are they doing this now? I honestly don't know. I don't have an answer. It's bizarre. Like I said, initially when I first saw it, it was like, okay, drones in New Jersey. Who cares? There are drones in New Jersey. But then when Kirby, prolific liar, sociopath that he is, comes out and just lies, and it's like, okay, you're saying that this hasn't hit any kind of unrestricted or any kind of restricted base. Well, obviously, it hit restricted base. There were like 2, and then that was before Wright-Patterson Air Force Base had down their planes because of the number of drones that were basically in their base. And it brings all sorts of questions. A, how did this get into a military base? B, why couldn't they detect those prior to those even getting into the military base? There's another question, why you didn't shoot them down. I mean, like there's so many questions associated with this. Yes, I don't want people shooting at airplanes. So there's that. But at the point where you're talking about trained observers and you're talking about military that ideally would have some sort of radar and something would have a radar signature that they can identify, well, they didn't seem to know what it was, and they identified it also as a drone. If you remember when Kirby came out, Kirby said these were planes or some kind of vehicles that people were flying in, which was, again, flew completely in the face of what people were talking about on the ground. And I'm talking about, in this case, the Coast Guard. I don't know what's going on. But Sparky, you could be totally right, but I have no clue. Also, the mysterious drone issues help distract from America's ongoing misdeeds around the world. Those misdeeds have been going on for God knows how long. I mean, we have been backing a genocide for over a year. If you were looking for something to distract from that, that should have taken place, 6 months ago, 7 months ago. The Ukraine war has been going on for God knows how long. 3 years? If you want to distract from that, you had to do it a lot sooner. I mean, you can make the case that Ukraine is losing and that they look like they're on the brink of collapse. But up to this point, Ukraine has looked like they were on the brink of collapse for a very long time. Maybe they know something that we don't necessarily know. Maybe that's why Putin's speech and Medvedev's speech was what it was, to kind of boost the audience up from this idea that, yeah, we might have lost Syria, but we're kicking the ass at Ukraine. I honestly don't know. It's admittedly strange. It's admittedly strange. Many of the videos that have been coming out are fakes because, the moment that you get a trend, you have all sorts of people wanting to add something to the trend. I have no idea why people do that, but whatever, they do it. And let's be honest too, clicks. Like, we have monetized reality. So the media, who is in a cage match with other media, are looking for the most stark way to announce whatever they're saying. It's like UAPs invading the military capacity. It's like that type of stuff. Not to mention you have YouTubers who do the same thing, who want to chime in to get their views for the story itself, so they are more hyperbolic than what it is. Look, I've told you for UAP issues, I only go as far as I can defend. And if I don't know what it is, I can't necessarily tell you I know what it is. So in this case, I'm just stuck with, I have no clue. I'm just left with this notion of it's weird. It's very bizarre, strange. Something that seems to be this kind of effect. And then again, like, most people don't typically look in the sky like talking about. And so the moment that you get a lot of people looking into the sky, okay, now those people are seeing a lot of stuff that they wouldn't see ordinarily. Okay, but how ordinary is this? Meaning, I don't even have a basis of comparison on how ordinary this is. I would say, though, that it probably started as something. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how to quantify it. But let's keep going. Sparky, better learn to speak Chinese. Obviously, Biden turning the United States over to China, just like Assad turned Syria over to Israel. Oh, and Turkey. Oh, that one burns. Look, I will tell you this. I have heard so many different takes on this side stuff. So many different takes. Everything from Russia sold out Syria, everything from Assad was getting closer to the West, or at the very least was getting closer to the Saudis and to the Gulf states, believing back channel messages that sanctions were going to be removed if he kept moving in a particular direction. Everything from Iran didn't get involved. I mean, the Ayatollah in that last speech sounded like he was trying to defend himself from accusations that Iran left Syria to the lurch. I don't know. I guess I'm more inclined to believe that even that one is weird to me. If you think about it, Assad fought like grim death last time around. He did not want to give up power at all. I don't know if it's because his wife is ill. I don't know if it's because he got tired. I don't know what it is. But it didn't seem like he was listening to the treaties coming out of the Russians and Iranians saying, dude, this is a problem. Your leadership is in jeopardy. You need to do something. You need to do something. It didn't seem like he was listening to him. So I don't know. People who are more affiliated with Syria are trying to give Assad a pass on this. Honestly, don't know. I have my hypothesis, but it's just my hypothesis. Why can't they be CIA or other intel drones? They could be. They very well could be. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. They very well could be. Coincidentally, drone legalization is up for renewal soon. I suspect that will pass. I think what they're looking for is I suspect that will pass. I mean, I would say, though, that the U.S. looks chaotic. This doesn't look like a well-organized, slick propaganda campaign. It doesn't look like that. It looks more chaotic. It looks like they're off their story. They don't get the story straight. I don't know. It could be internal. We don't know. What happened to U.S. troops who went to Cote d'Ivoire after they were expelled from Niger? Are they still there? So, yes, they are still there, but they're being whittled down. Apparently, when they initially started off there, they had certain numbers, but those numbers are getting less and less and less. The issue became less, well, it was about the French, but it expanded from the French into just foreign soldiers on our bases in general. They started looking at it as an issue of sovereignty, according to Kofi. I mean, that's the way he was explaining it to me. I was talking to him the other night about it, that it started to spread. I mean, Chad hasn't been overthrown in a junta. By the same token, they're still getting rid of French troops. Kofi seems to believe that it's going to be something that spreads across Africa on this notion of sovereignty for Africa, looking out for the best interests of Africans, removing the yoke of colonial masters off of the throats. And if you think about it in the political space that we have in the States, the people who, if you believed that a candidate was bought, are you more or less inclined to support that candidate? And if you're coming out of this kind of colonial rule and you see one group that have said, you know what, we're done with that. We're done. We've removed this colonial yoke. We're now moving forward in a different direction as sovereign states. Are you more or less inclined to follow suit when you see the example that's been set? I suspect you're more inclined. So, from Kofi's point is this seems like something that's going to spread. This becomes a social phenomenon that's moving through Africa, going even all the way down to South Africa. It's fascinating. Let's keep going. ECOWAS was neo-colonial construction. Yes. And that was Kofi's point, that the Sahel states who are coming together have basically, three of them? Okay, well, those three are no longer part of ECOWAS. So not only has ECOWAS been diminished in the number of states that are associated with it and lost control of those states that were associated with it, it looks like it's a tool of the West. It looks like it's a tool of the colonial states that used to oppress Africa. And so it looks bad in comparison to the thing that looks good. Think of it like if you had to put it like when Sanders was running against I forget the candidates on stage. And between the two, Sanders looked like, okay, well, that's what they were supposed to be, but this is kind of what they are. And you got a lot of people who were not creatures, meaning people who were obsequious to the Democratic Party. Yeah, they went along with Clinton, but people who thought, well, Sanders is not being bought off. He's getting community raised donations in order to run his campaign. That seems to be more, let's say, situated without having this kind of yoke of the party associated with him. Okay, that can turn out to be false. Fair enough. I mean, he ended up being the sheepdog. But that being said, at the time, when you looked at the two, one seemed more real than the other. I consider this to be something similar. EOK, super sticker. EOK, leave a statement, leave a comment. I like comments, but thank you, EO sticker. And Trash Panda, super sticker. Trash Panda, thank you too. I really appreciate it. Guys, I appreciate all the support for this channel. You have no idea how much it helps this channel keep ticking along, especially in the very beginning when everything was going wrong. And I was like, oh, God, maybe this isn't the thing. This is not going well. But over time, it got better. And, you know, all of your support, whether it's $1, whether it's a like, whether it's a share, all of those things, it supports the content. And I appreciate all of it. You have my deepest appreciation for allowing me to do this. Yeah, you allow me to do what I love. And hopefully you get something out of it in regards to the news, opinion, commentary, all that good stuff. And the little family that we've developed here from 7 to 10 a.m. So I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like it. I'm going to say share. And I am going to say subscribe. Thanks all. You all have a fantastic day. And I will most likely see you, knowing me, later today. Oh, by the way, Lawrence Wilkerson is going to be here tomorrow. In fact, I have a damn good week for you guys. Laith Maruth is going to be here tomorrow. Lawrence Wilkerson is going to be here tomorrow. Mark Sloboda is going to be here on Wednesday. I'm going to see if I can get Scott Ritter to join me on Thursday. Planning out the week. It's going to be a damn good week. You guys have a phenomenal day. Have a good one, all. See you in a few hours. Signing off.